you have anything fun and exciting coming up?
Yeah, pay attention.
Welcome everyone to the Finance and Operations meeting.
Professional, yeah.
I now call to order the May 2024 meeting of the Finance and Operations Committee of the University of Minnesota Board of Regents. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you to those who are joining us by way of the live stream video and those attending in the boardroom as well. Let me welcome our student representatives today, Flora Yang and Nico Vasilopoulos. I don't know if I said that right. I'm trying to say it faster, but I'm terrible at it. They're both from the Twin Cities campus, and Flora is just finishing up her first year of medical school, so congratulations there. Let me also formally welcome Interim Senior Vice President Julie Towson. Thank you for taking on the senior leadership liaison role for the committee. Before we proceed, I would like to note one change to our agenda. We will proceed with item number 1 as planned, the collective bargaining agreements. However, it will be followed by review and action of the consent agenda. We will then continue with the rest of our agenda in order. So with that, let's begin with our first item this afternoon, which is to review and act on the collective bargaining agreement. Vice President Horstman, please walk us through the proposed agreement with the University Education Association. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, members of the committee. As Chair Hipsch said, I am pleased this afternoon to bring forward the agreement reached between the University Education Association, representing both Duluth and Crookston faculty. And our hope is that you will review and act to approve on this collective bargaining agreement. It is a 3-year agreement effective July 1st, 2023 through June 30th, 2026. The employees covered by this CBA, as I said, are faculty located at UMD and UMC, and included in University of Minnesota Unit 9 as defined by the Minnesota Public Employee Labor Relations Act. The total number of employees is 535. Negotiations began May 12th, 2023. The tentative agreement was reached in mediation on March 19th of this year, and members of UEA ratified the TA on April 5th. For Duluth, the parties agreed to a term faculty promotion ladder to give term faculty opportunities to advance their careers. There was a memorandum of understanding work group to look at historical memorandums of understanding and identify and catalog them, and an MOU for a UMD and UEAD joint workload work group to make recommendations for revisions to tenure and tenure track workloads and to clarify term faculty workloads by June 30th, 2025. Both parties also agreed to a salary floor of no less than a 0.75 compa ratio by rank and CIP code. This includes a 3.75% increase for FY24 with a 0.25% use of funds to increase any compa ratios below 0.75 to that level per the salary study. And in the following years, FY25 and 26, it will be salary pool plus 0.25% of the aggregate base to fund equity, identified equity salary issues in each year, not to exceed $100,000 each year. For Crookston, the parties agreed to a salary equity review and adjustments MOU that provides for a salary study, which will be taken on later this year by OHR and UMC and their faculty, and implementation of recommendations made by it each fiscal year. They also agreed to a 3.75% increase for FY24 with the 0.25% to fund salary results of the salary study, And this includes up to $15,000 set aside for the duration of the contract in FY '25 and '26 for any identified salary equity issues. I would like to thank both bargaining teams, those from Duluth and Crookston that represented the faculty, and for those on the university bargaining team at Duluth and in our central offices, both for their commitment and their perseverance to reaching this contract. And with that, I would ask for your questions and hopefully your approval of the agreement.
Thank you. Before we start our discussion, is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the resolution related to the proposed labor agreement with the University Education Association?
Motion to approve.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Thank you. Now we'll turn to discussion. Is there any discussion? Okay, Regent Turner.
Thank you, Chair Hibbs. I just want to know, is there any retro pay involved here? How does this work? Go back to January 1st, or was it supposed to be settled back in 2023, or?
What we administer in regard to retro pay is a negotiation point. In this particular one, we are going back to the beginning of FY '24. In the way that is administered, it does take a period of time for our central payroll office working with both system campuses to construct that history and enter it properly, but it will result in a lump sum payment. And it will be made as soon as possible as those administrative duties are complete and we feel it's accurate. And so that is something they will look forward to. So it doesn't go back and cause confusion with the recent pay and tax year because of how we handle that.
Okay. So do they miss, when was their contract due again?
The last contract was June 30th of '23, so this contract starts July 1st, 23.
Okay, but it's 6 months where they don't get any.
No, we go back to July 1st of '23.
Oh, you are?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
okay,
The school year, not the calendar
Yeah.
year.
gotcha, okay,
Sorry.
Did that answer your question?
yes.
Regent Gully.
I just wanted to say thank you so much, and thank you to all of the faculty who worked so hard on this contract. I know it's been a lot of work over a lot of time and a lot of perseverance. I just want to mention that I'm especially happy to hear about the changes for fixed-term faculty. I think that will be a great support for faculty on the Duluth campus. Thank you.
Is there any, okay, Regent Kenyanya.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I had a question and then a couple comments. You referenced some agreed floors, for the comp ratio. That's based on a set of peer institutions. I'm assuming, and if so, is that list part of bargaining, or how is that determined?
From the last contract, we had agreed to do a market study in collaboration with UEA leadership from Duluth. And that was conducted using our compensation team and OHR. We also had a third party review the work to confirm that what we were doing was the appropriate approach. And in that discussion, both faculty and administration had input into what the peer group was, and what we decided was it was a combination of Carnegie, M1, and R2 universities for compensation purposes. So that is the group that we use as peers. And we do benchmark by CIP code as well as rank for that. So we have comp ratios for every area of study basically at Duluth right now. They're the first faculty group to go through that process in that manner.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so that answered my question. Thank you very much. Just two comments, not really in the scope of the the agreement per se, but because we are speaking about UEA, first of all, again, thanks to both sides. Absolutely, this is great that we're finally under an agreement. Two observations, just in reference to UEA. One is something I was speaking with a faculty member about recently, and it's that because these faculty are represented by UEA, they're not represented in Senate. And I think that probably makes sense for 90 whatever percent of situations. But then there are some matters that are discussed through Senate that are influencing system-wide policy and whatnot, and then therefore, wouldn't necessarily have these faculty members be a part of that conversation. This is not necessarily a question for you, just some reflections while this is in front of the board. And then my second comment is also related to Regent Gully's. Definitely happy to hear about some of those changes, because we've heard a lot of that feedback, especially with teaching load. And I think it's good timing with the earlier conversation we had in Mission and seeing how invigorated the newly promoted faculty were. And I think we all acknowledged that, the fulfillment and happiness of faculty, directly impacts the success of the students. So I think if we can, manage those loads better, those outcomes are great for students. And then on term faculty, again, another conversation we've been having here that obviously is not just specific to UEA faculty, but no, it affects them. And we've heard from them specifically on this. I think in an earlier conversation about term appointments, there was just some questions from Regents on how, if we can consider maybe even doing 2-year appointments, instead of 1, to give the faculty members just a little more certainty about really their lives and making plans about courses and whatnot. So not questions I expect you to answer, and they're not necessarily completely related to this, but some points I wanted to put out there, probably more so for my colleagues. But thank you for the contract, and look forward to supporting it.
Any other discussion? Regent Gully, go ahead.
Would you mind if I just,
that's
I gave a shout out to the Duluth campus faculty and forgot to mention Crookston, and I do not want to forget them. So thank you, Chair.
Yeah, you bet. Okay, there being no further discussion, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. The motion is approved. Okay, now we will consider the consent report. I would like to note that the consent report includes the appointment of interim Senior Vice President Budget Director Julie Tonneson and Vice President Alice Roberts Davis to the East Cliff Property Task Force. Their appointments fill the vacancy left by Senior Vice President Franz. Interim Senior Vice President Tonneson, will you summarize the remainder of the items of today's consent agenda?
Yes, thank you, Chair Hipsch, members of the committee. May's consent agenda includes appointments to the Board of Trustees for the Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, the appointments to the East Cliff Task Force that Chair Hipsch just mentioned, 1 employment agreement, 4 purchases of goods and services, and 1 real estate transaction. So first, we seek your approval of appointments to the board for the Landscape Arboretum Foundation. 7 members will continue their appointments this next year. 3 members are being recommended for renewal of their appointments, and 1 new appointment is being recommended. Next, we have 1 employment agreement for our new chancellor at our Duluth campus, Dr. Charles Neese, coming to us most recently from the University of California, Merced. With your approval today, his appointment will be effective July 1, 2024. We have 4 purchases of goods and services that meet the threshold for board approval. Now, a contract with EAB Global Inc. for the Office of Admissions to support the student recruitment process. The annual cost increase for next year associated with this new contract is built into the FY25 budget that you will hear about momentarily. Second is a contract with MetLife to provide system-wide disability insurance and the necessary administrative support services with that. Third, a contract for Sodexo for food service management at our Crookston and Morris campuses. And fourth, an agreement with Sun Country Airlines and Pass Charter to provide airline services for the Twin Cities Athletics Department. Last, we have one real estate transaction for your consideration. We seek your authorization to execute form ground lease agreements for the University Grove residential land in the Falcon Heights neighborhood, which is near the St. Paul campus. The university owns the land in the Grove, so when someone purchases a home there, they enter into a 40-year lease for the land. Since that arrangement exceeds the new 10-year threshold for approval of leases, approval of this item will serve as a blanket approval for us to execute these ground leases as they arrive, as the sales happen. And that, Mr. Chair, concludes my remarks on the consent items.
Thank you, Senior Vice President Tonneson. Now, before I invite a motion to approve the consent report, you are welcome to ask questions, make comments, or ask for an item to be separated out from the report to be voted on separately. Are there any questions, comments, or requests to separate an item out? Okay. So there is none. So is there a motion to approve on behalf of the board the consent report?
Move approval.
Is there a second?
Seconded.
Okay, there's a motion and a second. Any further discussion?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. No, just wanted to highlight the appointment of Dr. Neese as UMD's chancellor. I'm really happy to have that search yield in such a successful outcome. Highly talented individual with good experience and strong Minnesota ties, even though he's coming from the coast. And I guess in the same breath, thank Interim Chancellor McMillan for his service to the university in different parts of this room, but we appreciate it nonetheless. And thank Chancellor Carroll and Vice Chancellor Irwin, who was here earlier, for chairing that search. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Oh, Regent Johnson.
Yes, I also wanted to add to what Regent Kenyatta said and offer my thanks to the current chancellor, interim chancellor of UMD, who has done an outstanding job and has helped me out a great deal since he left this position for the 8th District the day I came in. So I just want to special thanks to him, and I wish the new chancellor well. UMD is a very special campus to a lot of us, and we hope that as we see one old friend move on and hopefully a new one come in, we wish everybody well. So thank you.
We may not be done with interim chancellor Dave McMillan yet. We'll see.
Looking forward to it.
We haven't decided yet. We'll let you know, Dave. So. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, say no. A motion passes. Okay. We're moving right along in the fun report here, fun deal. Our next item is a review of the President's recommended fiscal year 2025 annual capital improvement budget. I would like to invite Interim President Ettinger and Vice President Alice Roberts-Davis to take us through the proposed budget. Interim President Ettinger, please begin.
Thank you so much, Chair Hibbs and members of the committee. As part of the Board of Regents policy, the administration is directed to develop a capital budget with a 6-year time horizon, updated annually. This capital budget authorizes projects to begin design and construction during the upcoming fiscal year. The proposed 2025 annual capital improvement budget is $581.3 million. In our original plans, incorporating the state funding request for HEAPR, that included the full $500 million, which would have represented 86% of the proposed 2025 capital budget, with local funds and university debt accounting for the remaining $81.3 million. As Vice President Roberts-Davis will explain, the current status of the bill working its way through the legislature would drastically change that ratio. I would like to thank Alice Roberts-Davis, our Vice President for University Services, and her team for their really tireless work. I mean, I've already done like 50 versions of this over the last several months, but in bringing this capital budget to you today, and at this time, I would like to turn it over to Vice President Roberts-Davis to continue the presentation.
Thank you, Interim President Ettinger. Good afternoon, Chair Hipsch, members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to present our annual capital improvement budget. In May and June of each year, the board reviews and approves the university's annual capital investment budget for the upcoming fiscal year. This is the last stop in the annual capital schedule and reflects the year one priorities of the 6-year capital plan and state capital request that were prepared last summer and brought to this board for review and action last fall. The 6-year capital plan is our main tool for planning capital investment priorities that the university will pursue for the next several years, as well as those priorities we will seek state support for in the state capital request. As soon as we wrap up this topic in June, we'll dive right back into updating the 6-year capital plan for next year, and we will see you again this fall for that plan. For today, though, we will focus on the projects to be implemented this fiscal year. Here's a breakdown of the broad categories of the FY25 capital plan. As you can see, we rely on the state for a substantial portion of our capital funding. I'll provide an update on the state capital request in just a moment. Next are university-funded projects, which are funded with any combination of university funds without state support. And finally, the budget includes repair and replacement funds that cover a number of small-scale recurring facilities projects like roof repairs and boiler replacements. Although these individual projects don't meet the threshold for inclusion on their own, we include them for awareness so that you know what we are investing in the upkeep of our buildings. Before I go into detail, I wanted to remind you of the main mechanics of the annual capital budget. The budget includes individual projects greater than $5 million, and this is a notable change to previous years where any project over $1 million was included. You will remember that this board acted to update the threshold in February after several really productive conversations and thoughtful analysis. This policy change better aligns the university with the majority of our Big Ten peers in terms of finding a good balance that ensures good governance while reducing undue administrative burden. All of the line items appearing on the budget must have completed pre-design and be fully funded in order to be included. And finally, the budget authorizes the listed projects to move into design and construction this coming fiscal year. Our request of the state this year was for one thing only, $500 million in HEAPR. HEAPR's importance in maintaining the safety and functionality of our campuses cannot be overstated. It plays a critical role in providing faculty, staff, and students with the facilities necessary to conduct their work. And it's the largest single source of funding available for making the routine but vital capital improvement projects on campus buildings and infrastructure. The university's practice at the May meeting has been to include the full value of the state request when the outcome of the bonding bill is not yet known, and since we have about 2 weeks left with the legislature, you see the $500 million request here. You'll recall that the governor recommended $103 million for the university. The Capital Investment Committee appropriated $64 million, and just yesterday, Ways and Means appropriated just $40 million. And so the number is very fluid. No decisions have been made, but we will expect to get something significantly less than the $500 million that we requested. There's only one university-funded project included in this year's capital budget. The IT staff relocation project will create modern office space in 2 floors of the University Park Plaza building to accommodate the relocation of staff from the Information Technology building. You'll remember that the current Information Technology building will be fully vacated as part of the Advanced Operations Center project that was approved in last year's FY 2024 capital budget. The capital budget also includes several university-funded R&R pools. These funds are used to tackle many projects such as elevator upgrades, HVAC and mechanical equipment replacement, parking lot resurfacing, LED lighting conversions, and so forth. Projects within these pools can move up or down in priority based on their criticality, cost efficiencies with other projects that are underway, or any balances that remain when projects come in under budget. I would also like to note a number of projects that you may see added to the capital budget in June or at some point during the coming fiscal year. And these are projects that we're currently working on, but that have not yet met the readiness threshold for inclusion in the capital budget. This slide provides a summary of the funding sources for the projects included in the annual capital improvement budget. And as a reminder, this includes the full value of the 2024 state capital request, which will be updated when we bring the budget back to you in June for action. And so with that, that concludes my remarks on the capital investment budget. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you very much. Is there any discussion? I guess not. I think the legislators probably took a lot of wind out of our sail here, but I mean, when you need to spend 200 million to 500 million a year and we're spending not enough, how do, you know, what's our long-term plan going to be when we keep getting less and less out of the legislature? That's something that we could talk about now, or we could talk about at a future retreat, but we need to start talking about it. So, but I want to thank you and for your report.
Thank you, Chair.
Oh, we do have the transfer portal guy.
I always have one in the chamber, Mr. Chair. I just want to get the lay of the land. Briefly, I was inquiring about the solar projects and the efficiency that those are potential add-ons, obviously. If you could just do a brief double click into where those might be and kind of what we're waiting for, if it's, you know, identifying funds or pre-design or whatever stage those are in.
Chair Hipsch, Regent Kenyanya, there are 10 locations throughout the Twin Cities campus that have been identified and that we are doing further due diligence on. Some of them are near parking, some of them are on buildings, but we're really looking for the best opportunities to consolidate our solar fields and really maximize the amount of solar power that we're creating and generating and using on the campus.
Thank you, Vice President Roberts-Davis.
Thank you. Regent Turner.
Thank you, Chair Hips. I'd like to just make a comment, just in case any legislators, when they're not doing something, look back on this. You know, I think that when we heard the 103 million that the governor, you were very good about going, what are the biggest issues that are safety issues? And I think we were really good at picking those out that really had to be done for safety reasons. And so to have that go from the 103 down to this 40 million, I would ask the legislature, can you at least consider the safety of our students and the people who are coming to our universities, and that this is a very worthy cause for our taxpayer dollars, is to ensure the safety of everyone involved in the community, in the university system. I'd just like them to remember that if they happen to look at this little video.
Thank you, Regent Turner. Regent Wheeler.
Yeah, thank you, and Chair Hips, and thank you so much, Vice President Alice Roberts-Davis. And I'm going to bridge on to what Regent Turner said. And you know, we got 8% of our requested HEPR funds that's currently on the table with the Ways and Means distinction. And I too really worry about campus safety in that and risk of failure. And so my question is, and it's difficult to prioritize with such a minuscule envelope, but I'm wondering, Vice President Roberts-Davis, what have we set out prioritization that uses, you know, different funding amounts based on what will be received, and that's far less than even the worst possibility that I think we envisioned months ago. But just wondering how really hard to prioritize things that are so related to just basic safety issues and risk of failure issues, but wondering where we are at in the prioritization piece.
Chair Hipsch, Regent Wheeler, that's a really good question. The current language, unfortunately, does some prioritization for the university. And so if that language should stand, we will have to move in that direction before we can tackle the projects that we would like to tackle for life safety and code compliance issues. However, the Washington Avenue Bridge is one of those projects that is funded, and that is obviously a huge safety concern for us. We're happy about that. As President Ettinger mentioned, we've gone through many iterations of this document as far as what we would do if we got 10 million, 20 million, 30 million, how that might work. In the current scenario that we've done, $64 million before yesterday was the number that we had. And so we've done a scenario for 64 million, which does take out a lot of the larger projects, but then allows us to pivot to a lot of smaller code compliance, life safety projects as well. So no question that there are plenty of projects to do. We will put the money to the best use. We will definitely prioritize safety, and we will get at least one major project done that's really needed here on campus.
Thank you. Thank you. Any further discussion?
Just a closing comment, Mr.
Oh,
Chair.
go ahead.
Yeah, I just, as we have this discussion, and Regents Turner and Wheeler, thank you for the comments. And we've talked a number of times at the reality of what's happened with state funding and what we can reasonably project going forward. Not to turn this into a campus master planning conversation, we've had that recently, but I wonder how we have to start thinking about our space utilization, especially as we had a conversation about online earlier. The hybrid workforce. Not suggesting we become an online university, no one wants that, but just, looking at our, because and of course you've looked at the full HEPR list.
Yes.
And I think we have a rating for, the different buildings and square footage and whatnot. And, a lot of that's in the red. So in hand with that and knowing how much deferred HEPR we have and what we might reasonably, probably even on the high end, expect. Maybe with that goes along that, and I think, we have a new policy on real estate, but maybe I guess that's more about real estate, not the buildings. So anyway, not just putting it out there for us to kind of be thinking about hand in hand.
To your point, we do need to strategize going forward with what we're going to need for space and how we're going to pay for it.
Yeah.
For sure, because, well, Vice President.
Chair Hips, Regent, we do have a plan for space consolidation, how we're using our space, how we're planning our space, how we're looking forward, how we're going to maximize the space that we have, and then take offline those spaces that we don't need for higher efficiency and lower operating costs.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to turn on to our next thing. Our fourth item is review of the interim president recommended fiscal year 2025 annual operating budget. Interim President Ettinger and interim Senior Vice President Tonneson will take us through the proposal. Before I invite interim President Ettinger to start the presentation, I'd like to note that the board is interested in feedback from members of the university community on the budget. Tomorrow morning, May 10th at 8 a.m., the board will hold a public forum here in the boardroom. Members of the public are invited to sign up beginning at 7:30 in the West Committee Room. Additionally, we're accepting written, audio, and video comments by way of the board's virtual forum on our website at theregents.umn.edu. We will act on the budget at the June Finance and Operations Committee meeting. And with that, interim president, please proceed.
Thank you, Chair Hips. Unfortunately, we're going to be delivering here another report that's highly influenced by a disappointing lack of crucial support from the legislature. For your review today, we are presenting the President's recommended operating budget for fiscal year 2025. The materials in your docket provide details of the all funds budget. The recommended and balanced operating budget anticipates approximately $5.1 billion in revenue for the coming year, to cover approximately $5 billion in anticipated expenses, an increase of more than 3% in both categories over last year. The 3.3% increase in costs reflects economic pressures such as across-the-board inflation, calls for wage growth from employee groups, and necessary expenditures to maintain operations and excellence. The budget focuses on fair pay for faculty, staff, and student employees, and the need to invest in student program and research priorities, while also trying to actively manage rising costs, critical operation and safety needs, and stagnant state funding. The University of Minnesota is foundational to shaping a future where Minnesotans thrive as innovative leaders and contributors to society. Through our commitment to education, research, and innovation, we cultivate the workforce and leaders of tomorrow drawing talent from across the nation to bolster our state's growth and resilience, and driving our economy and enriching our communities. However, this year, we are disappointed that our fiscal 25 core mission request to the Minnesota legislature has not been approved. Without this adequate state funding, our ability to fulfill this vital mission is compromised, and there are real consequences from reductions in services and programs to increase financial burdens on students and families. We have difficult decisions ahead of us, and going forward, we will continue to urge our state partners to support adequate and increased funding. I will now turn this over to Julie Tonneson, our Interim Senior Vice President for Finance and Operations, who will walk us through the details of the proposed fiscal year 2025 operating budget.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee for this opportunity to present Interim President Ettinger's recommended operating budget for FY25. Before I get into all the details, I do want to give a big shout out and thank you to my team who helps me put this together. So Corinne Zewers, my Assistant Budget Director, and Emily Larson, my Senior Budget Analyst in the office. That's the core. We put this together, and we do that with the help of many, many Chief Financial Managers, over 50 of them out in the unit. So I want to give a shout out to them. They help us. They can't be done without them. So I just want to start there. To put our discussion today in, July 1 marks the beginning of the second year of the current biennium. Last June, you approved the university's budget for the first year of the biennium, FY24. The budget before you today, which is an annual budget, builds off the original plans for the biennium, but factors in the lower state appropriation than requested for the second year, as Interim President Ettinger mentioned. That in turn leads to different decisions on tuition rates, spending levels, and compensation. It incorporates the enacted state appropriation plus all other funds and activities that make up the remaining 83% of our budget. As we will highlight in the presentation, the most impactful decisions built into our recommendations are the general tuition rate increases, the planned budget cuts throughout the university, the compensation increases. These three decision areas, combined with the known change in state appropriations, create the basic building blocks for what is a very complex and detailed budget. In the end, we're asking you to approve these framework recommendations, but also all of the other estimates and plans represented in the full all funds FY25 budget before you today. So what exactly is in the all funds budget? There's a lot of detailed information in the budget materials included in the docket that we feel is important to document as part of the approval process. Our intent today is to highlight the pieces we feel provide the best summary of what we are asking you to approve at the June meeting of this committee. Starting with the revenues, the pie chart for FY25 looks very similar to last year. The total projected revenues of $4.8 billion, and that's without internal sales, so it's slightly less than Interim President Ettinger mentioned, they are distributed across the restricted, auxiliary, and unrestricted categories as pictured here. Red for restricted, yellow for auxiliary, and green for unrestricted sources. 37% of the budget will come from the O&M state appropriation and tuition combined. Total revenues, excluding internal sales again, are projected to be up approximately $154 million from this year. The most significant increases include roughly $42 million in tuition revenue gain, $40 million in sponsored grant increases, and another $28 million in the auxiliary funds. Also notable is a reduction in the O&M appropriation of $10.3 million compared to last year due to the elimination of non-recurring appropriations. The assumptions we built into the projections on attachment 2 to the budget for funds outside of the known state appropriation and projected tuition revenues include what you see here. ICR, the revenue our sponsors provide for overhead costs associated with grants, as in most years, is expected to remain stable, up just $628,000 or 0.3% compared to this year. Conservatively, units are aware of which grants are ending, so they plan for the loss of ICR associated with those, and they're generally only increasing funding related to new awards that they are absolutely certain they're going to get. So this is a conservative estimate. We are anticipating continued growth closer to historical trends for most other types of revenues, averaging 4 to 4.5%, with the exception of our auxiliary revenues, which we anticipate to be up closer to 6.5% based on rate increases, and we will talk more about that on an upcoming slide. Moving to the corresponding spending projections, expenditures of roughly $4.7 billion are estimated to be up 3.3% from the current year, an increase of roughly $148 million. They are displayed here by object of expenditure category. The distribution across these categories really doesn't change appreciably from year to year, but there are a few takeaways embedded in these numbers and the changes compared to FY24. First, projected spending on non-sponsored salaries is up 3.85% total, which reflects the recommended salary plan and the general expectation of some additional market and retention adjustments, promotions, and net hires. Additionally, the cost of fringe benefits is expected to increase only about 1% from this year due to slight over-recoveries in recent years resulting from our fringe pool methodology. That doesn't represent a reduction in cost. It's a methodology issue that leads to that small increase. Outside of salary and fringe categories, the expenditure side of the budget reflects growth levels of 3.5% to 4% in most categories. This rate of growth reflects both the impact of inflation, which varies by unit and activity, and patterns of buying less or buying differently in response to extraordinary cost growth where that exists. So this level of spending is held down automatically by units' decisions to remain within budget. In addition, the impact of reallocations is sprinkled throughout these categories, which also holds down cost growth. And finally, the projection of sponsored grant activity on the expenditure side matches that of the revenues, up $40 million or 5.1% due to the anticipated continued success in attaining more awards. In terms of changes over time, I've shared this table the last few years showing the annual increases and decreases in total spending, including sponsored grant activity. Annual change can be hard to predict because expenditures tend to be more volatile in a couple of categories in particular, equipment and purchases of professional services or contracts, which can swing at unanticipated rates. FY16 and 17 are an example of that happening. FY21 reflects the impact of the pandemic and our significantly reduced activities and spending in that year, which meant that even at normal levels of spending in FY22, the swing from that really low level meant an actual growth of over 11%. The other piece of information on this slide speaks to the areas of spending that traditionally see rates of inflation that often can exceed the typical CPI reported rate. Again, these occur differentially across our units, and we manage them in different ways. We can return to that conversation if you like, but we've thought about and incorporated plans to handle inflation within the budget before you today. And finally, for this overview section of the presentation, we included this slide last year and felt perhaps it was useful in helping to connect the dots between the all funds budget I just summarized and the more in-depth conversation we'll have next about the funding and investment decisions we're proposing as part of what we call the budget framework. This picture is a way of viewing the whole budget, and it works best to start in the middle with the gold box. These are the resources we bring to your attention throughout the year, and ultimately, and most importantly, they are the resources we, as leadership, make decisions about as we develop the budget. We need to decide what to ask for from the state of Minnesota in terms of new appropriations, and we can't do that in a vacuum. We also have to decide what to plan for tuition rates and how much of their state and tuition funds we want to ask our units to reallocate. And then we always have this extra category at the bottom called Other Unit Revenues, which takes us over to the left column under the Other Revenues heading. Here you will see the non-state and non-tuition funds that the units differentially generate based on their activities. We hold our leaders and financial managers accountable for balancing these budgets. So the first goal for each of those funds is to grow enough to cover the cost increases for the activities that are currently paid for by those funds. Things like compensation cost increases for the staff that are doing that work, any inflationary costs on the supplies and the materials they need to do that work, and any other enhancements to their processes or methods. Some of those funds are also restricted to a particular purpose, and that has to be managed as well. If any of this revenue in particular places is unrestricted and growing beyond what is needed to do what I just described, then it comes to the table to combine with the other resources in the gold box to help pay for what you see in blue. Because those same cost increases exist for the activities supported by the state appropriation and tuition. The state appropriation and tuition need to grow to cover compensation cost increases, priority initiatives, inflation, facility needs, et cetera, to maintain what we're currently doing. And if they don't grow enough, or to temper their growth, we force reallocations and we leverage that available growth in the other funds where we can in order to help pay for the things in blue. The other revenues on the left supplement on the margin and where appropriate the plans for state appropriations and tuition. We're slowly becoming more dependent on these other revenues. But to date, their growth overall has not been large or consistent enough to take the place of the need for growth in the extremely important state and tuition dollars. The result of going through a review of each item on this slide and making decisions along the way is what you have before you in the form of a full recommended budget package for FY25. The estimates of revenues and spending for funds in the left column are included in the total budget on attachment 2 and in the slides we just talked through, as are the proposals for the gold and the blue boxes, which we will move to now in the next slides. In summary, and we'll dig into these in more detail in some upcoming slides, the new incremental framework spending of $98.8 million, the blue box from the previous slide, can be described in the 5 categories shown here: compensation, core needs, advancing programs and services, tuition variance, and facilities and technology costs. On the resource side, how we propose to pay for that incremental $98.8 million of spending is summarized here. 44% of the resource plan would come from accessing existing revenues in units and in central, 43% from our recommendations and estimates related to tuition, 9% represents the recurring funds set aside in the FY24 budget to cover cost growth for FY25, and the final 5% is a plan to reassign recurring strategic plan funds held centrally to cover cost increases in FY25. Now, for more of the details and starting on the resource side, I usually start the revenue change section of this presentation with an explanation of what's happening with the state appropriation. But in the absence of any change there, we'll skip that slide and we'll start instead with a brief overview of our recommendations for the other unit revenues and the internal reallocations within this proposed budget. This set of resources above the dark line totals $37.5 million. First, in the gold box, 11 units will have tuition revenues coming in above budget this year, FY24, totaling a recurring $9.5 million. These revenues were unanticipated and can be applied to new recurring expenses beginning in FY25. This is a return to normalcy for this category. Last year, this same item totaled only $600,000 across just 4 units. These dollars are not associated with the rate changes or the enrollment swings projected for next year. That FY25 tuition revenue change of $42.2 million I mentioned is over and above this $9.5. Second, for FY25, units proposed to dedicate $7.7 million of available growth in other revenues to cover costs reflected in the framework. This primarily includes growth in the unrestricted indirect cost recovery funds associated with sponsored grants in some units this year, but also incorporates growth in fee and endowment income, for example. And finally, we're planning the use of $2.8 million in one-time O&M balances that 2 units propose to cover recurring costs for next year as a bridge to their future revenue increases or savings. Then, in addition to other revenues, we are planning $17.5 million of internal budget cuts and reallocations. And below the bold line, we're planning to use some one-time central resources to bridge the final recurring need for 2 units. I'll explain each of these in a bit more here on the next 2 slides. As this chart shows, the recommended level of internal repurposing of existing resources through deliberate decisions to eliminate or reduce spending is consistent with most of the last 10 years. As noted, this chart shows only recurring reallocations in state and tuition funds. The roughly $18 million of planned spending reductions for FY25 represents an average across all units of 0.8%, ranging from 0 to 3.7% by unit. Based on early responses from units, we are expecting 85% of this to come from position eliminations and salary savings through attrition, from turnover and position restructuring, and 15% from reductions to non-compensation items like supplies, travel, events, and so forth. Our planning process asked each unit to propose actions that would result in spending reductions of 0.75%. As we went through the budget process and each unit's individual circumstances were reviewed, however, we arrived at a specific level proposed for each, rather than implementing across the board. We reviewed their unique financial challenges and issues, the tools available to address those challenges, priorities in concert with the institution, and the impact of proposed spending reductions before settling on the final plan. And then, as I mentioned a moment ago, this budget recommends the use of $6 million in central balances from central reserves to offset what would otherwise have been deeper cuts or dependence on the potential of unanticipated revenue growth next year to balance the budget for 2 units, the Duluth campus and the Carlson School of Management. Both are developing and implementing plans to replace this $6 million in one-time support with recurring funds in FY26. We will monitor those activities into FY26, and we will make adjustments to that as necessary. Moving to tuition revenue, you can see from this slide that there are a number of components that make up the estimated $42.2 million gain in our proposal. The largest portion would come from the recommended 4.5% increase in the resident undergraduate rate on the Twin Cities and Rochester campuses based on estimated enrollment in each unit. For the Twin Cities, it is anticipated, if all other Big Ten schools held their rates flat, that the Twin Cities resident undergraduate rate will move from 7th highest of 18 to 5th highest. But if the 2 schools just above us, Rutgers and Michigan, increase their rate even 0.5%, the Twin Cities rate will remain where it is, it's 7th highest in the ranking. We do not yet know their plans. The second most significant revenue gain would result from the recommended increase to the graduate school rates, plus a varying set of recommended rate changes for all other graduate, certificate, and professional programs that have their own unique rate structures. These unique rates are based on market comparisons and take into consideration demand, financial support available for students, students' earnings potential, and costs. For FY25, outside of some rate restructuring that you will see, the changes generally range from 0 to 6%. The third category of revenue increase is the recommended 5.5% increase for the undergraduate non-resident rate on the Twin Cities campus, which is estimated to yield roughly $7 million. In this case, for the Big Ten comparisons, if all other Big Ten schools held their rate flat, the Twin Cities non-resident undergraduate rate will move from 13th highest of 18 to 12th highest. But early information indicates Ohio State is planning to increase their rate 5%, perhaps, so they will jump up to, and the Twin Cities rate will remain 13th highest, even with this increase. The final 3 categories of tuition rate changes are estimated to generate just over $5 million in additional revenue. Most of that will come from projected enrollment growth in 11 of our tuition generating units, not large numbers for each, but gains on the margin. The rate recommendations for the Crookston, Duluth, and Morris campuses is for a 1.5% increase, and FY25 will be the final year of the 4-year phase-in of the tuition surcharge for the Swenson College of Science and Engineering at UMD, and that's consistent with your originally approved plan for implementation. A summary of the tuition rates without the surcharges is displayed on this table. It's difficult to identify a single dollar impact when there are so many different scenarios of student experience and characteristics, but it is worth noting that for students eligible for the new North Star Promise program through the state of Minnesota, their tuition and fees, including the increase, will be covered 100% by federal, state, and university sources. Additionally, the significant changes the federal government is making in the definitions and calculations of financial need will impact the Pell Awards, and those changes, coupled with a projected deficit in the Minnesota State Grant Program, will lead to further changes in state grant awards. If the current estimates hold, all of the increase in tuition and required fees on each campus will be more than offset by the increased aid for those with the highest financial need, those with income levels below $80,000. For the next income tier, generally in the $80,000 to $120,000 range, it looks like the state grant awards will be decreasing, actually, for many of them. Early calculations for a typical student with a family income of $100,000 shows potential reductions in that grant in the $1,000 to $1,500 range. Some of this is expected to be a one-time drop as the state budget adjusts the grant program funding level in the next biennium and eliminates that deficit. There's more uncertainty this year about the impact of these changes on the federal and state level, but it does appear that it will be a real mix of either significant additional support, close to $9,000 for some, or some level of reduction. All of the tuition rates for this year and proposed for next year are detailed in Attachment 4 to the budget, and that's included, I believe it's starting on page 80 of your docket materials. In addition to the tuition rate changes, this budget incorporates a variety of changes in student fees. As occurs every year, we reviewed each proposed change to academic, course, and miscellaneous fees to ensure they are consistent with board policy, as we discussed this morning. They are detailed in attachments 6, 7, and 8 to the budget. I do want to call out just a few quick things about these fees. First, many of them do not cover the full expenses of the materials or activities they support. The units must use state and tuition revenues to cover a portion of those costs. Second, with this budget, we're recommending an increase in the campus collegiate fees equal to the recommended increase in the resident undergraduate tuition rate, with a few exceptions that are identified in the budget document. Rather than holding flat for a number of years and then recommending large jumps up to make up for years of inflation, this new strategy allows for a more gradual impact with fewer surprises for students. And third, this budget includes a recommendation to move forward with implementation of a new CourseWorks term fee that will provide an option for students to choose a $279 per term comprehensive fee for all of their course materials, digital and printed, or to opt out of that comprehensive fee and instead essentially elect to opt out of the identified charges on an item-by-item basis. This approach will provide an opportunity for cost certainty and convenience for our students. The second category of fee mentioned here is the mandatory student services fees, which, as again we talked about this morning, are developed through a student-led process on each campus to review and ultimately recommend fee levels for a variety of activities. For FY25, you see the result of those processes in the gold table. In large part, these changes reflect realized and anticipated cost increases, but also support some minimal enhancements to programs and services. Finally, for this slide, our student housing and dining programs continue to face significant cost increases, particularly for labor and food. For consistency, the rate changes proposed for FY25 included in the blue table here are generally for a double room and an unlimited meal plan where applicable, but the actual experience can definitely differ by student. In some cases, the rates are projected to cover costs, but in others, the rate changes will not cover the full cost increases or replenish past deficits or depreciation reserves these units spent down during the pandemic. More to come on that in an upcoming slide. With these recommended rates, current information shows that for comparison purposes, Crookston will remain the second highest of 12 in their comparison group. Duluth will remain in the middle of their regional peer group, 4th or 5th out of 7, depending on what North Dakota State does. Morris will continue to have the lowest room and board costs within its public liberal arts peer group of 7 and also within the group of private liberal arts schools in Minnesota. Rochester will be in the middle of a similar city peer group, 7th out of 14, and the Twin Cities will also be in the middle of the Big 10, 9th or 10th out of 18, depending on what Penn State does. Putting it all together, the tuition rate changes, the mandatory fee increases, and the room and board increases for a full-time resident undergraduate student living on campus with an unlimited meal plan, put all those assumptions in there, the cost increase will range from roughly 1.9% to 5.3%, depending on the campus. But in all cases, the bulleted actions you see in the box on this slide are helping to control what could otherwise be even more significant increases in these rates in order to balance the budget. And again, I want to note that for students with the greatest financial need, those that are eligible for the North Star Promise program, the proposed cost increase will be offset by at least 25% and approaching 50% of the total at a minimum, just related to that program's guaranteed coverage of tuition and fees. For many of those same students, the estimated increase in federal and state aid awards before North Star scholarships would even apply will more than offset this entire increase. In addition to the unit level resources and tuition, So moving on to outside of that, there are 2 recurring resources helping to balance next year's budget. The first we've talked about multiple times this past year, and that is the $9 million of our FY24 recurring appropriation increase that we didn't commit to recurring items this year. Plus, for next year, we are recommending the release of $4.5 million that was set aside as a kind of revolving fund in a previous budget. It was approved in FY22 for one-time annual strategic plan investments. With this recommendation, that $4.5 million will be redirected or reallocated away from that revolving fund to now be able to cover FY25 cost increases across the institution. So now's a good time to pause and just summarize where we are in describing the budget. I just talked through each of the framework resource variables on this summary slide, which is just a repeat of slide 11. Notice I didn't list the fees or room and board rates as part of that 99.2, even though I summarized them as changes. And that's because those are part of the other revenues portion of the budget that must be balanced outside of the framework. We just wanted to explain the larger impact the budget will have on a typical student, so included that information here with the recommended changes in tuition. Now let's move to a brief summary of what we propose allocating the 99.2 of incremental framework resources to. First and foremost, the priority for this budget is to invest in our talented faculty and staff. The proposed plan for FY25 includes the 4% required increase for non-faculty labor represented employees in accordance with those approved agreements, and a 3% general merit pool for all other employees. Even though it's less than we originally planned, the proposed increase for FY25 exceeds what we have been able to provide in most years since FY11, except the last 2. Over a 12-year period, we had 2 different salary freezes, 9 years of 2 to 2.5% increases, which tried to keep pace with inflation, which was obviously lower than it is today, and 1 year that I will call COVID recovery with a 1.5% general increase. Embedded within the FY25 recommendation are 2 additional components. We recommend a high priority market adjustment to increase the wage floor for civil service and P&A employees to $20 an hour, and for undergraduate students to $15.25 per hour. Across all our funds, this full compensation plan is estimated to increase salary and fringe expenses for the institution by over $100 million. The plan calls for distribution of the 3.0% pool on a merit basis for the non-labor represented employee groups rather than across the board. Any market adjustments for individuals or groups on top of the 3% merit pool will need to be determined by individual units, either through deeper budget cuts than those explained in this budget or growth in other revenues not already committed as part of this budget. Beyond compensation, the investment plan is detailed on attachment 1 to the budget includes 4 categories of recurring spending. The largest investment need in the budget this year, outside of compensation, falls in the general category of core operations and services. Included in this list are things like the structural imbalances that we knew we were carrying into FY25 for 7 units. Imbalances largely the result of tuition shortfalls compared to budget in FY23 that we did not completely address in this year's budget. You might remember that conversation from last spring. It also includes increased library collections and software costs, additional compliance-related positions, 2 business analysts for the student finance area, and so forth. Following close behind in terms of magnitude, the budget includes over $17 million of new investment in what we categorize as program enhancements and compliance. The largest piece here is the direction of discretionary funds in the campuses and Twin Cities colleges to address areas facing growth in student enrollment and increased or evolving student support and services. For example, the College of Science and Engineering will be able to invest in the Department of Computer Science and Engineering, and the law school will be able to invest in faculty to better meet the program needs of current enrollment levels. This category also includes close to $700,000 for required presidential scholarship matches and $1.5 million for modernizing our data warehouse, $1 million to expand our capacity in marketing and communications, and $745,000 to build a strong government relations function, among other things. The third category of investment is the requirement to address a budget to actual tuition revenue shortfall in 14 units. I want to stress here that this shortfall seems large and spread out, but there was also a positive variance, you might remember, in tuition revenue for 11 units that I mentioned earlier. So that when you factor that in, the overall tuition shortfall this year is projected to be only 0.03%. For these 14 units, however, the situation creates a recurring problem because the $16.4 million was allocated and planned to cover recurring costs this year. That continue into FY25 and that need to be addressed with the incremental new tuition revenue in FY25 or budget cuts, etc. The final category is the annual need to cover technology and facility-related cost increases, which is coming in at just over $9 million. This is for the vendor licensing agreements on our large enterprise systems and then the utility and debt cost increases across all of our campuses. And finally, attachment 1 also identifies non-recurring investments, some of which we have already touched on today. The total here is $46.8 million, a larger amount than we typically recommend. But this is a good year to make some bold moves when we have strategic needs and initiatives and available non-recurring resources to make a difference. The largest single item is $12.4 million within the first bullet, to wipe out a good portion of the deficits accumulated in our student housing and dining units coming out of the pandemic. We use central reserves and federal aid to cover a good portion of the refunds to students during that time and the drop in revenues as occupancy decreased coming out of the pandemic, but that wasn't enough. Our plan was to add the deficit eliminations to future rate increases, but we are instead recommending taking care of the majority of those costs now to hold down future rate increases. That first bullet also includes roughly $9 million of one-time legal fees and expenses, the $6 million bridging proposal I mentioned earlier for the Carlson School of Management and the Duluth campus, plus items such as research equipment upgrades, the office set up for the new Associate Vice President for Enrollment Management, and among other things. The second bullet includes funding for a miscellaneous list of items that have a bit more of a programmatic focus, things like campus-specific enrollment marketing, student workstation upgrades for the College of Design, staffing for technology initiatives that must proceed right now, online mental health services for the Crookston campus, and a $5 million strategic investment pool for President-designate Cunningham's discretion. The third bullet for facility and technology infrastructure items includes research and accreditation required repairs, a significant classroom renovation, a West Central Research and Outreach Center project, and a collection of contract costs impacted by significant inflation related to elevator and fire alarm maintenance and pest control. And finally, as reported the last 2 years, the university received $7 million from the University of Minnesota Foundation as a one-time investment for strategic initiatives at the university. Managed and tracked through the President's Office, 1.2 of the $7 million was invested 2 years ago, FY23, on 2 items. In FY24, an additional $3.4 million was invested for 10 initiatives, and this budget recommends the remaining and final $2.4 million for the 11 items identified with an asterisk on the second page of attachment 1. All have direct ties to the goals and commitments of MPACT 2025. Before closing the detailed explanation of the budget, I want to highlight the recommended sources for these non-recurring investments. $38 million of the $46.8 total, so 81%, we are recommending to come from the balance in central reserves. We are projecting an ending balance in central reserves for the current year, so this June 30th, of $93.3 million. It is recovered from the pandemic years by a combination of reduced draws to cover the revenue shocks during that time and increased returns thanks to good investment decisions, higher interest rates, and a growing base. The combination of the strong balance carried forward, continued revenue growth into next year, and the recommended spending in this budget leads to a planned ending balance in the Central Reserves Fund next year of $118.5 million, which is roughly $88 million above the board policy guideline, and that's after this recommended spending. We recommend leaving that level of reserve where it is to continue as part of the base funds generating additional interest earnings and as a true reserve for potential areas of financial uncertainty in the next couple of years. It is not yet a recurring resource to apply to recurring costs. We will update the revenue estimates for that throughout the year, and we'll continue to strategize about the best way to manage those funds into the future. The remaining 19% of recommended non-recurring investments will be funded by that last piece of the $7 million allocation from UMF for strategic initiatives that, as I've already mentioned, the internal assessment system we have in place for addressing large technology system costs, and central level O&M balances that have accumulated over time. To wrap up this summary, Chair Hipsch, I am pleased to turn the last slide over to Interim President Ettinger.
Thank you, Interim Senior Vice President Tonneson, for that detailed presentation on what we can all see is a very complex budget. I'd like to take this moment to summarize our priorities behind what we've offered for you for the fiscal 2025 operating budget. First, to invest to maintain excellence within these constrained resources. Second, to support faculty and staff within these resource constraints. To improve efficiencies and reprioritize activities. To address critical compliance, operating, and safety needs. To implement a necessary tuition and fee plan. And to incorporate responsible revenue and expenditure projections. Each of these priorities has been essential in developing this carefully considered budget, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and discussion about the recommended fiscal 2025 operating budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Vice President Tonneson and Interim President Ettinger. There's really a detailed budget in our docket, and I'm sure most of you have had a chance to read it. If you haven't, it's really well done. I can't even tell you how well done I think it is. It's very easy to read. It goes through great detail. It's got a lot of thought into it. It's very complicated, but year after year, somehow you make it seem easy and very digestible. You know, like any board on any budget I've ever been on, it's never easy decisions that we have to make. This is probably one of the hardest things that we have to do as a board, because there's never enough money and there's always way too many expenses. So, but we have to make the tough decisions, and that's why we're here. So we're going to start this off with student Flora Yang.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, and thank you, Interim SVP Tonneson. I actually have 3 questions, so I'll try to keep it short and sweet. But first, again, thank you so much for your work. I'm sure it takes a village, under your leadership to produce this very comprehensive report. So thank you so much for that work that you put in. So my first question is just looking at the numbers in the docket between page 80 and 84. I see that undergraduate tuition is going up by 4.5 or 1.5% depending on the campus. There's a dentistry sub-programs tuition that's increasing by around 11%, while various postdoc programs are actually decreasing by around 37%. So can you talk more specifically about the framework of decision-making when it comes to sort of determining how the tuition rate is being changed within each program?
Sure. Chair Hipsch, student representative Yang. The process is that outside of the general undergraduate and graduate school rates, the schools themselves bring forward their proposals for those unique rates. So dentistry, as you mentioned, or the certificate programs, or some of the departmental master's programs. The schools bring forward their proposals based on a whole variety of factors. When you see, including market comparisons, earnings potential, financial aid availability, all those things, but when you see those big swings like that, some of them that are decreasing or some that are increasing a lot, it's generally a restructuring issue. It's not overall a change in what students are going to have to pay during their time there. It's usually a restructuring. So if you have really specific questions, we can get you a very specific answer, but that's generally what that is.
Awesome. Also, my second question is you've mentioned during your presentation that there's lots of tuition payment options, like Ohio State you mentioned might be thinking of a 5% increase, but I think they've traditionally had a tuition guarantee for in-state students. correct me if I'm wrong too, and then the University of Illinois maybe is implementing a tuition freeze for the upcoming 2024-25 school year, and differences like that within the Big Ten schools. I know that we can't really directly compare these schools because there are some factors like, cost of living, the amount of in-state versus out-of-state students, funding from the state, et cetera, that makes that a really difficult sort of direct comparison. But has the university discussed these different, tuition implementation options in the past? And then why are these different tuition payment methods really not an option for us?
Sure. Chair Hips, Senior Representative Yang. So, Senior, I did it again. Student Representative Yang. When you first hear, and when you're in my position and you first hear that a school is holding tuition flat, your first thought is, how are they doing that, right? I mean, that just how can you do that? So we have looked at what they're doing and how their makeup of their budget is, which is a lot of what drives that. So a number of the schools that have been able to hold their resident undergraduate rates flat, it's largely and many times because they are increasing enrollment significantly, often non-resident enrollment significantly, and non-resident tuition rates significantly. So that isn't something that we have done here, but if we were going to drastically shift our ratio of resident, non-resident toward the non-resident side and increase those rates, as I pointed out, we're 13th of 18 in the non-resident rate. So if we were to move up and change that ratio, we would be able to have different decisions on the resident undergraduate side. I do want to, and there's a variety of other things too. Some of them get more money from the state in a particular year, so they're able to do that. Or it varies by school and by year in terms of how they're able to do that. I will say that just one quick correction, just to make sure it was clear. The Ohio State, by the way, we don't know yet for sure what any other Big Ten school is doing. We just have information from our colleagues on those campuses of what they're planning, not that it's approved. But right now, the Ohio State 5% was on the non-resident side. So that was just want to make that clear. That wasn't the resident increase. So I hope that answers your question.
Yeah, thank you so much. And the reason also why I'm asking is I believe 6 years ago, the university had a conversation about like tuition guarantee for like what the med school currently does, where when you come in, you have a set rate, and then you basically know that that's your rate for the 4 years of attendance. And so I was just curious if we were ever gonna sort of revisit that conversation, or if it's ever been revisited since 6 years prior.
Yep. Chair Hips, Student Representative Yang. We actually had, how we did that, we actually had a pilot program. So for a number of years, we ran that as an option for students. We had the regular tuition rates, and then we had the possibility for students to sign up for that type of a guarantee on the undergraduate side, and extremely low take on that. Like very, very few. So it wasn't worth maintaining in the tuition structure that as an option. And so we haven't explored it since the elimination of that pilot program, which my years get mixed up, but it's been years now that we haven't explored that again based on that experience.
That makes sense. Thank you for clarifying. My last question is sort of a difficult one, and I don't expect you to, fully hash things out, but on a funding level, sort of what ideas do we have beyond, asking the state for more funding that will allow us to, provide a more affordable education to our students? Like, how can we be a little bit more creative with our, other avenues of funding? And I know that, Regent Hipsch sort of mentioned and commented on this previously, and I know there will be more conversations to come, but I'm just curious about sort of where we are currently in our brainstorming process.
Chair Hipsch and Student Representative Yang, that is the big question on the budget. How are we going to sustain going forward if our state appropriation doesn't keep up? And, I understand it's a complicated budget, and yet there's only so many variables that we have to play with. The interesting thing, or the important thing about the O&M appropriation and tuition are that we can use those dollars to do anything legal, and it's up to us on the highest and best use of those dollars. So as opposed to a donor who will say, I will give you some money, but it's for this one thing, and it may not be recurring, as an example. So what we have to do is look for every resource opportunity we can to help, because they all help, even if they're restricted, and no matter what, they all help. But to actually replace the state money will require increasing other unrestricted sources in a way that we can sustain. That's a recurring increase and a recurring base. So we do have incentives for our units to grow revenue. They, outside of the state appropriation process, they retain the revenues that they generate. And so there is a lot of incentive for them to do that, because then that's it impacts their ability for that edge of excellence, if you will, for that investment dollar. So there, we already have that in. So now it's, what other opportunities can we possibly think about? And we use everybody out in the institution to help us really, I think, generate those ideas for where can they go for money. So it's a great question. I'm glad you don't expect a definitive answer, because it continues to be a work in progress.
Thank you.
Thank you. That answer your questions? Okay.
Yep.
Regent Gully.
So thank you so much, SVP Jonathan, and thank you, Chair. I really appreciated Student Representative Yang's questions. Those are such good questions. I did have a quick follow-up on that question. Can you say a little bit more about, and this is actually not the whole question that I'd like to ask, so maybe I have a couple, but could you say a little bit more about what when you did the pilot project for the flat tuition rate, was it a higher rate for people going in? Do you have a sense of why people didn't opt into it to begin with?
Yeah.
Chair Hips, Regent Gully, we didn't do any kind of survey, or so I really don't know exactly why people didn't choose it. But yes, I mean, we used the typical structure for something like that is you try to set it based on your projected enrollment at a level that allows each year the entering class to go up more, but then stay flat. And so, yes, I mean, that is the model that we implemented. It was too long ago for me to be able to remember exactly how much it was more than the regular rate. But, we tried to do it in a way that was attractive, but still made sense financially. So
Okay.
we'd have to go dig into some old paperwork to get deeper than that.
No, that's okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Chair, thank you. So my real question when I was reading this budget was, I see that we have 4% allocated for our labor represented folks, which is great. But that the rest of the budget allocations for any wage increases are in a merit pool. I would love to know more about how those would be allocated, and specifically if those are any way available to term faculty, to adjuncts, to staff. I do not see an across-the-board raise, which makes me extraordinarily nervous about this plan.
Yes, Chair Hips and Regent Gully, that is correct. The 4% applies to the agreements that have been signed for labor represented employees. All other employees, so all those you just mentioned, are part of the planned 3% pool. And that's managed at a unit level and is delivered based on merit considerations, which means it's part of the performance review process, and they have the discretion to decide. So they'll have a 3% pool for faculty, for example, and they decide through their internal processes how to distribute that to faculty. And the same is true for all of the other employee groups. It is not a recommended across the board. Let me just say one thing about that, and I know Vice President Horstman can speak to this, and actually will, I think, later today and tomorrow, but we are anxiously looking forward to incorporating that recommended committee, the compensation strategy committee, into our process. That question on how to move forward is one we ask ourselves every year, but would benefit from a broader committee focus on what's our strategy going forward. We decided this year with their input to implement it all as a 3% merit pool.
Okay. And my other question is, I see that the wage for students is going up to $15.25, but the minimum wage in Minneapolis is $15.57. Can you speak to that?
Yes, Chair Hips and Regent Gully, yes, we're currently at 15, and rather than jump all the way to 15.57 for one of our cities, Minneapolis is different than the surrounding area, we thought the $15.25 per hour minimum was a good first step, and given the resources we have available.
But so we're paying less than the minimum wage in Minneapolis.
Yes, and more, I'm sorry, Chair Hips, Regent Gully, and more than other surrounding cities.
Regent Kenyanya.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Senior Vice President. I appreciate the presentation and the conversation, difficult one, obviously. So you talked about restricted sources and unrestricted. And yes, we definitely prefer the latter, although I think what you kind of alluded to is when you get a restricted source, that allows you, to obviously, reallocate somewhere else. So we have there was 16.4 FY24 budget shortfall. But then you also mentioned that other units went over, right? Overestimation, and I think that put us at like 0.03. To someone outside the university, they're looking at that and saying, so you're good, right? I mean, so then they're wondering, why is that even a line item?
Yeah.
And you talked a bit about, our model, right? How units are incentivized because they keep the revenues they generate, and we've talked at length previously at the pros to that. And I'm kind of thinking, at what point, whether holistically or just in specific cases, do we think about reconsidering that? Because again, to that outside person, it's like, how's there a deficit when, I mean, it's the university, you ended up being just about flat. And I think it actually reminds me a little bit of the student fee conversation we had in Mission, because, the dean who's going to be disappointed to see their surplus go is going to need it, in a few years when things change. So that's the first question. How do we think about that? And yeah.
Yeah. Chair Hips, Regent Kenyanya. So it is a function of the budget model that we use inside the university and how we make decisions. It's a great question. You might recall from a previous conversation, I've shared with you how we essentially build a budget framework for each college and each campus and look at, given our model, what are your revenue changes, what are your cost changes, given the assumptions in the budget, and are you going to have a surplus, are you going to have a deficit, how are you going to come out? And by virtue of that, it does raise opportunities and challenges within the same budget, even though across it's going to balance out. So that's why we have to, it's a function of the conversations we have and the process we go through, and that's why you see it here. If we pulled all that revenue central, you wouldn't see it. You would not know that we have 11 units that are coming in above budget and that you have 14 units that are coming in below budget. You wouldn't know that. So it's a function of that process. It's a choice, that we have made in how we manage the budget. I think it's a good one. I personally think it's a good one. It forces us to think through what's driving our revenues, where do we have challenges, what are we going to do about them in a different way than just transferring money between units. So those that have a surplus this year are able to, and with our input and through our conversations, we say, yes, let's use that surplus for X. So when I mentioned the College of Science and Engineering investing in computer science and engineering, which is in desperate need of additional faculty and support for expanding students, they're able to do that because that tuition is coming in above budget this year. That's where we're directing it as an example. Another unit that is on the opposite side where they have a challenge, then we have to look at that unit and say, what can we do Why is your tuition under? Is it going to stay under? Is your enrollment dropping? What are we going to do about that? Do you need to right size? I mean, that's a part of the conversation that you're having with the system campuses tomorrow. It's about aligning the enrollment with the budget and what it's able to support. So it allows for a different level of conversation. I believe in a different understanding of the budget, but that's why you see it both sides, is because it generates different decisions depending upon the unit.
Mr. Chair, follow. Yeah, thank you. Thanks for the explanation. And I think in principle, I probably agree. Maybe what I'm saying is, and we do reallocation. I mean, that's not a new idea. Maybe I'm suggesting maybe a more aggressive approach. When the times call for it, right? If a unit says we needed 50 and they got 60, and then we're raising tuition because another one didn't get theirs. And again, I mean, and you're discussing with them. You're looking at the investment priorities they have and evaluating those. So and I do agree. I mean, if it was all coming centrally, then it becomes too subjective. Then it's SVP Tonneson decided to give them that. So so I get that.
Yeah, just one follow-up, Chair Hibbs, Regent Kenyanya. That question is on the table every year for us, depending upon how things fall out. We always ask ourselves that question: should we be reallocating between units? And we have done that in the past.
Okay, appreciate that. And then just last comment is on investing in talent. I mean, I think that was the title of the slide, and Regent Gully, I think, got to that a little bit. I mean, maybe not. I mean, probably not for this year, but I'd like to discuss or at least explore a reallocation model that maybe factors in pay equity. And what I mean by that is we've, in a lot of different conversations, we've identified the areas or units or employee classes that we know are paid lower than their peers. So I'm imagining a model where instead of 4 flat, it's 5 for these areas that we've identified and then 3 everywhere else. Again, I'm not suggesting that we open that can of worms for this budget, but I mean, we have discussed addressing some of those equity issues. And I think when it's flat across, from your lowest paid classes all the way to your highest paid ones, then you're not. It's a missed opportunity to address equity. But appreciate that.
Thank you. Regent Davenport.
Thank you, Chair Hibbs. I have a couple comments and then a clarifying question. But first, thank you, VP Tonneson and your team for putting the materials together and working on that with everybody at the university. I want to thank the foundation, too, for their ongoing support. I think that really does contribute and is appreciated. I want to circle back to the comment about non-resident enrollment, helping some universities keep enrollment down overall, and express my support for the philosophy of being a land grant and being an accessible institution to our students within the state. That comes with the price, as you point out, which I think compels our state legislator to better support. If we want this fine institution to support our students within the state and not turn into a non-state residential or whatever university, we need that support. I also want to comment about using central reserves. And I think the management of those reserves over the years put us in the position to be able to benefit from that. So I support that, and also maintaining that little above the 8 million above, because we could have a fire, we could have a flood, we could have another pandemic. And so I think that that's necessary and really planful. And so my clarifying question is related to, I don't know what slide it is, but it's page 140 of our packet. It's the one, change in tuition fees, room and board. And so when we look at the percent of tuition increase, which is at yellow, I mean, the increase, let me rephrase it. That represents the student share of increased costs on the cost of labor, growth in, or, you know, the inflation costs, the expenditure costs, so that their student tuition increase is not 100% backfilling what our expenditures are increasing, and that there is or is not, there's no intentionality at tuition increases due to increases in Pell Grants or other sources. That, I just want clarification on that.
Sure. Chair Hips, Regent Davenport, if I'm understanding the question correctly, our tuition rate recommendation is not based at all on what the changes in aid are. We just understand that that's a useful piece of information to understand, that particularly for our students that are have the highest financial need, that all of the tuition and fees and the room and board for most of them will be more than offset by those other increases in aid. We don't have the exact numbers yet. That's kind of still in process, but it looks to be that that's the case. But no, we don't set the tuition rate based on what the feds or the state are doing.
Thank you.
If that's your question.
Yep.
So that's your question? Okay. Regent Talurabe.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, SVP Tonneson. I always appreciate the material, even though it's, you know, there's a lot there. And I've had additional questions, and the team's been able to answer them. I think I will just say, I just have, again, to Regent Davenport's point about kind of being a land grant institution and about where the increases are occurring. I have just real concerns about that. And so I think it will just be really important for us to just make sure that we are prioritizing our students and to make sure that I understand where we want to maintain excellence, but we also need to ensure that this institution is accessible to as many Minnesotan students as possible, right? And so that's just a comment. And I also echo the sentiment that I think just understanding the expense side of things, so that the story isn't that we're increasing tuition to cover all of the expenses that are, so one, if there's anything that you can help in terms of all of us understanding that, because I think that that is a real challenge, right? You know, of course, student tuition is a big part of the revenue, but I don't think that it should offset some of the things that maybe we could do better, right? And I think I'm really interested and have been looking forward to us getting to that point of also understanding how the things that we are learning from Peak or others that can help us to begin to make some of those hard decisions when we have to. It's never about when times are good. It's just when we have to make hard decisions, what needs to, how do we understand what we've learned, and then know that we've now have to make some difficult decisions. So it's hard when we have so many things in play right now with inflation and increasing cost of everything, and wanting to make sure that all of our faculty, staff, employees are treated well. But then at the same time, what does that do to tuition, right? So I'm really going nowhere with that. I'm just saying it's very difficult, and I need a better picture of how we're making these decisions, and feeling like we are doing something that is about access, but also it's about maintaining excellence here at this institution. And right now, when I look at the numbers and the increase for in-state in particular, I just have some real concerns. So I'll just note that. You talked about the also the state program and the federal financial aid program and how that's changing. I wonder if you also had just specific numbers. Do you know how many of our students will benefit from that?
Chair Hipsch and Regent Talurabe, the last we heard from the state of Minnesota, they are estimating that for the North Star Promise program, that's that last dollar in, they're estimating, I think it's between 4,000 and 5,000 of our students will get some of that state aid. Keep in mind that they also know that the federal and state grant program, which is a different state bucket of money, that those things are going up for many of those same students. That drives down the number that are eligible that will benefit from North Star, because they're benefiting from these other things first. So it's kind of tricky that way, but they're estimating right now 4,000 to 5,000 for that program. And it's another, I think roughly 10,000 for the state grant program.
Thank you.
Regent Farnsworth, welcome.
Thank you, Chair Hips and Senior Vice President Thomas, Interim Senior Vice President Tonneson, and everyone for your work on this presentation. Going last, going close to last, a lot of what I had to say was covered, which is great. I will say just a couple of general reactions. Appreciate Regent Talurabe and Regent Davenport's focus on the land grant mission of the university when it comes to the priorities and some of the decisions in this budget. I guess I would add in particular to what Regent Talurabe was saying, I'm also kind of looking for more information, particularly when it comes to the proposed tuition increase, maybe not even proposed, or not necessarily more information, but I wrote down in my note sheet here kind of the more laser focused, clear and convincing case when it comes to that in relation to this proposed budget. I'll also say I'm looking forward to some more discussion and dialogue in the context of our conversations tomorrow related to system campus, our system campuses in particular, enrollment drivers and other relevant feeders into this conversation around budget, and particularly how it's going to be impacting our system campuses. Two, I guess, more points briefly. I will share this with the proper folks if it hasn't already. I see Regent Kenyanya was on it as well, but I'm kind of in the sea of thousands of emails as of late. There was an email from a university community member with some questions around student service fees and how those are being allocated and processed there. And so would appreciate some clarification as we move towards action in June with those, and then ask that information to be shared with the rest of the board as well. And then one question for Interim Senior Vice President Tonneson or whoever would be best directed. There was brief mention of peak earlier in the context of peak within the financial realities of this budget and the financial realities of the university, and was just wondering if it wasn't mentioned already, and I apologize if it was, context around if we're, not a status update of where we're at with peak, because we get those presentations from time to time, and I'm sure there's going to be another one soon, but is there kind of to remind us or remind me or remind others or whoever else may be wondering from a cost saving standpoint where peak is at or where peak is projected to be. And if I'm the only one that needs that reminder, I apologize, but would appreciate that, as it was mentioned and it kind of sparked my my memory. So thank you very much. Those are my questions and comments.
Chair Hipsch, Regent Farnsworth, I think the primary question you have was related to peak, so I'll start there and then you let me know if I missed something along the way. The peak question, first of all, there is a planned update of peak at the June board meeting, so we will be doing a more robust update of implementation, where we're at, what our projections are, and so forth. But just so you know and I'll just remind everybody that we're not factoring in any savings from peak in the current year budget. We didn't last year. This year, I don't think we will next year either. We can't know what the final recurring budget savings are until all the units are implemented. It would not be fair to base those final calculations unit by unit, this is one of those cases where we need to see the whole before we're going to know what the actual budget savings are. And that changes by unit. And so we have to wait until all the units are through so we can add it all up. We are estimating, so there's nothing in this year's budget. We are still estimating a range of actual budgetary savings in the $0 to $10 million range, I would say, on an annual basis, but that's early. Don't hold me to that. And we are also going to be tracking beyond budget savings productivity gains and other ways of looking at the benefits of peak beyond the actual budgetary savings. So that will all come as we get further down the road on peak.
Thank you. So I got a clarifying question on the land grant conversation. James, did you have something first? Or
Oh, no, thanks, Chair Hipsch. I just wanted to say thank you for that reminder. Of course, as we're not fully through implementation, that makes sense. But I appreciate not only for me, but I think it's helpful to remind the university community of where that's at as it relates to long-term budget projections and these conversations. So that's all. Thank you, Chair.
good point. Thank you. So my comment is, so what I heard Regent Davenport say is that as part of our land grant mission, we should put more Minnesota kids in our colleges, which is going to cost more because of in-state tuition is less than out-of-state tuition. But what I heard others talk about is the fact that as part of our land grant mission, we should give kids in-state cheaper tuition. And I think that those are, and that means we should raise our out-of-state. I'm just trying to get they're both not saying the same. I don't think they're both saying the same thing. And I'd like to get what your comment is on this, and then maybe a clarifying from you guys.
My comment, Mr. Chair, would be I understand them. One is an enrollment and recruitment issue, and one is a tuition rate and cost issue.
Okay, so they're both together. But if you do increase in-state, you would have to raise.
To raise the same amount of money, Chair Hipsch, if that ratio shifts, so
Yeah.
there are more in-state and less out-of-state, to raise the same revenue, you would, all else being equal, you would have to increase the non-resident rate. Yeah.
So maybe,
Stay
okay.
in that. But
yeah.
they are kind of two separate.
They're two separate issues, because now I understand both issues, so, and I agree with our land grant status as well. I agree with, I think, Regent Davenport, and anyways, next is Regent Gully.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you, SVP Tonneson. I was wondering, am I correct in the assumption that we use the responsibility center management model for financing? Is it completely, or is it, I had read once that it was a hybrid version?
Chair Hipsch, Regent Gully, I would argue that every RCM model, Responsibility Center Management model, is a hybrid because none of them are all the same. But we have a full RCM model, which means that we attribute 100% of the revenues out, and ultimately the state appropriation as well. And we also attribute all of our central support costs as a charge out to our units. So we are a full RCM model.
And how do we know if the units, so we know when units are going above their budget, but how do we know when they're going below their budget and how they're using their funding? And do we reallocate funds if, say, for example, they're not using all of their funds, or are they able to sit on funding, or how does that work?
So Chair Hipsch and Regent Gully. So in an RCM model, it's a distributed risk model. And so that means that when they budget for tuition, that's where the primary risk falls, is if they make their tuition revenue estimate or they don't, that in our system will mean they have a surplus that year or they have a deficit. We work with the units actually now starting in the fall on the current year estimates after first term goes in. So we know if they're coming in above or below where they're at, and we monitor that through the year. That becomes part of the budget process conversation. So for each unit, if they're coming in above budget, they don't attribute it, they don't spend that as they wish. They're supposed to hold it for the budget process so we can decide how to deploy those resources going forward. If they're coming in under, it is their, and they know this is their responsibility to take action as quickly as possible to reduce costs or to spend down balances. So in an RCM model like we have with distributed risk, we also have larger balances out in the units than we otherwise would have to retain because each one of them should have some kind of a reserve. Now some do, some don't, they have different levels, but that's all part of working through the process to arrive at what do we need to do to make them successful given those unique sets of circumstances. So does that answer your question?
Yeah, I guess I was wondering, we don't necessarily see what's happening at the college and department level. Is there more that you can share with us about how that spending happens? I know that we just don't get to see that a lot, and it's sort of hard for me to wrap my head around the budget when we don't know how that gets spent sort of like at the lower levels.
Chair Hipsch, Regent Gully, we should have a conversation about what kind of information you would like to see. We do have information. We don't monitor, obviously, all the decisions they make in their budget, but there are different ways to report on their spending. So we could have a conversation about that and what might be useful.
Thank you. And just one last comment, and not a question, but as far as I know, so back to the question of performance reviews, as far as I know, adjuncts are not eligible. They don't do performance reviews. And so I believe that about 40% of our university faculty will be completely left out of any merit-based increases. I would be interested to know, so maybe it's not that high, but I would be interested to know more about that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
And then maybe it is a question. So
Yeah, Chair Hipsch and Regent Gully, and I've got friends who will correct me if I'm wrong, or you can come up here and explain it. But no, they're clearly not left out. I don't know what the actual process is to determine the increases for each employee group, but they are in the budget and included in the pool, the 3% pool.
Yes, we could put together some information on performance management and how it's carried out across the university for different employee groups and different units. There's different cycles, different times, but interim SVP Tonneson is correct in that they are included in the 3% salary pool. They are employees. That is something that they are included in, and it is administered that way. So each unit makes their own decisions on how they distribute it, but that is the pool they receive.
but just to
Okay, we need to keep moving here. I have a few more regents that you can talk to them after the break here. Regent Mayeron.
Thank you. We, at a very high level, from time to time, we'll talk about sources of revenue that will address compensation or tuition levels. And we talk about basically the main sources are tuition revenues and revenues from the state for O&M. And I've heard my colleague Regent Hipsch saying, with our desire to keep tuition down and the, at least if the past is the best predictor, the dollars from the state are not going up. They're not even staying level, they're going down. That we need to, that what other sources, and he has talked about what that really means is we need to increase our endowments. We need to increase our the fundraising arm of this. And so I don't know if he's right or wrong about that, if that is the answer, but I am thinking about the successes, whether it's at the foundation or our own endowments, and also the impact it's had on central reserves, that we've had some incredible run on investments where we've done extraordinarily well. And as I understand it, to the extent we've used or are talking about using those funds, it's for non-reoccurring expenditures as opposed to reoccurring expenditures. If I'm wrong, you're going to correct me about this. But I'm wondering, is there a way to tap in on those years when when we're doing well in the market and the market's up and we're succeeding in it, to be able to start to use some of those dollars to address, for example, tuition? And if I'm displaying my lack of understanding of how finances work I admit it, but I keep wondering, why can't we use this money when we've, and I understand the market's volatile and it goes up and down and there's no guarantee. But to be honest, there's no guarantee with enrollment. There's no guarantee from the legislature. Everything is volatile, so it seems. So why can't we use more of that and more of that this year?
Chair Hipsch, Regent Mayron, excellent question. So, and I tried to allude to this without getting into too much detail, but on the slides, let's talk about endowment earnings and central reserves kind of separately. Endowment earnings are being used to the on a recurring basis to the extent that the earnings are there, for example, to fund, and again, this is all restricted. The endowment earnings are generally restricted, but they're for scholarships usually or for chairs, for faculty chairs and faculty support. So what happens is the units, as that revenue continues to grow, will start to shift expenses from O&M onto those funds. And we are seeing that. That's what you see in that other revenue category. When I say we're becoming more dependent on it, that's part of it. And the endowment earnings is part of that. So that's happening. It just isn't enough to cover, a major increase in compensation or what have you. It's just kind of on the margin. So that is happening. And I think will continue to happen as we go forward, and we can push harder for units to do that. So that's something we can, actually focus on a little bit more, but it is happening. The central reserves piece is, I'd like to remind everybody that just 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, the central reserves balance was $9 million, which is well below policy guideline. And so I am not ready to recommend to the president that this recent gain is going to be maintained at a level, and I like to think of 5-year increments for recurring. So for the next 5 years, will we have, 5 years plus, will we have the recurring resources to start paying people? Because if we don't, then we have to cut. Again, we're not in a good position. So that is why my recommendation to the president and the group has been to watch it. And that's why I said it's not yet recurring, but I can see there's a potential for that. And that's something we have to continue to watch in the next couple years. If it does maintain, we can start shifting more of those central reserves to cover recurring expenses. We already do use it for some recurring expenses, so it's a matter of increasing what we're spending recurring out of that fund. And if we're able to maintain that revenue growth, then we could potentially do that, recommend having it support more of the operating budget.
I just have a quick follow-up question. So with the central reserves, is it possible to have it be, for example, a set percentage? And so as the central reserves go, so say you said 3% of it or 5% of the central reserves could be pushed into dealing with our O&M, our operation maintenance expenses. And if the central reserves is up, then there's more dollars that can go into it. And if it's down or non-existent, then we're not getting any of it for that use. But to have some confidence that we can look to that as a source year after year that addresses the fluctuation in the market.
Chair Hipsch, Regent Mayron, I would say we do that today. I don't know what the percent is. I'd have to figure that out in terms of how to even calculate the percent. But we do today, and I don't have it right in front of me, but we have, I'm going to say $10 to $15 million of annual recurring expense coming out of central reserves, regardless of what happens. That's what we're doing today. And so my recommendation would be, so if we're going to increase that, how much should we increase it? Because if we came in low, there's no backstop, right? There's no other reserve. I mean, we'd have to go pull money out of the units probably in that case. So I want to be careful about that, but I'm looking at, will we be able to increase that recurring let's just say it's 15 million today, will we be able to increase it on a steady base going forward? This budget before you actually has an increase of 2.3 million recurring coming out of central reserve, so I'm doing it a little bit, but not enough to take the place of tuition at this point. But I do think that that's a possibility in the future.
Good. Regent Turner?
Thank you, Chair Hips. VP Tennyson, right? Got it all? Good enough. I'm very much interested in ultimately higher ed, and especially the university where we have so much talent, so much research going on, trying to find other sources of income. I don't know if that means we open up a shop on the corner and we start going into business or something, but I think we're going to have to, it's my humble opinion, knowing nothing about finance, that we need to find other sources. I am curious as to how we stack up with our increases against the state system. Is everyone going to look at ours and go, okay, we're heading to St. Cloud or we're heading to Mankato? Do we anticipate usually that they raise their prices kind of the same, or?
Chair Hips, Regent Turner, the Minnesota state system is a state agency, and so some years the state of Minnesota actually puts a restriction on them in terms of what they can and can't do with tuition. So they have years where the state in law will say you can't increase it; it has to be flat, and that happened a number of years, and their budgets were in significant trouble because of that. Now I think the current biennium they're increasing 3%. I don't remember what it is, each year for 24 and 25, but maybe I'm wrong on that.
President,
Just to add to that, and I may not be correct either, but my understanding is in the process of last year, Minnesota State getting a significant increase for both years of the biennium, they also agreed to a tuition freeze that was funded by the state.
Yeah.
So for this upcoming year, they're going to be zero and we're going to be whatever we land at.
Wow. Oh, can I do a follow-up
You're
just
probably
comment?
right. Yeah, you're probably right about that.
The PR of that really bites.
well, it does, but also some of their campuses have been in the news for severe budget cuts too. So they're not, you know. And to Regent Mayeron's point, I think, you know, we're kind of in a golden age of giving here, with baby boomers retiring and having a lot of money, that now is the time, and it's a golden time, at least everybody says that. And so if we can get more money into our endowment, if we're ever gonna do it, it's now, put it that way. So anyways, I think we're done for this session, and I wanna appreciate Vice President Tonneson and taking all of our questions, and we're gonna recess for 10 minutes.
10 minutes, I just.
Nice.
Okay, I call the Finance and Operations meeting back to order. Our next item this afternoon is a discussion of the annual Workforce and Human Resources Strategy report. Before I invite our presenters to provide the overview, I would like to note that this is the first flip presentation that we are piloting. Vice President Horstman recorded a video of his presentations, which can be found in the docket materials. I'm confident that all of my colleagues watched the video prior to today's meeting and are prepared to engage in a robust discussion. I would like to thank Vice President Horstman and his team for taking on this initiative. Vice President Horstman, I understand that you have a few slides and remarks to frame our discussion. Please proceed when ready.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. First, I'd like to introduce my esteemed colleagues who are accompanying me today and will help with the conversation. And to my left is Senior Director of Total Rewards, Mary Roman Cool, Benefits and Compensation. Senior Director Brandon Sullivan of our Talent Strategy Group that covers acquisition, performance management, leadership development, and training, and engagement. And Angel Udine, our Senior Director for Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion, who is partnering with many of our units across the system and our campuses currently on one of the initiatives that we'll be talking about today, the IDI assessment. So we are pleased to share our annual report with you. We thank you for taking the time to listen to it in advance. I would note that in addition to that presentation, we also have provided the required annual report on total compensation that you can view in the docket. I'd like to start with a few highlights from the presentation just to give us a baseline. We did comment that the university is the 7th largest employer in the state of Minnesota. And we have over 27,000 employees system-wide across our 5 campuses and across all of our extension programs in all 87 counties. We recognize there are a lot of opportunities and challenges in front of us. There was just a robust conversation on this that we were engaged in prior to this presentation. But we are also recognized as a top workplace, and we strive to advance our efforts to further innovation, creativity, and service. The HR community is distributed with employees in our central OHR office, as well as on the campuses, in the colleges and administrative units. There are more than 350 HR employees serving the university and finding purpose and contributing to its mission. In the recent past, a number of investments made by our HR teams have included adjusting salary floors for student workers and employees, developing flexible work guidance in this new hybrid environment, offering a new Roth investment option under the Secure 2.0 Act for our deferred compensation plan, expanding the diverse network of EAP therapists in our Lyra Health offering, which offers 8 no-cost counseling sessions for every member of our community now, given our well-being expansion, and is very popular for those needs for our employees and their dependents. We have simplified the Regents tuition benefits policy and take some first steps to make it simpler to process, simpler to access, and that has been received well. We've created a single administrator for our employee health savings accounts and flexible spending accounts. These are accounts that support the health care of our employees. Often they can be, historically have been a frustration to use and to process and to look at the reports on it. And we think we have solved for that and made it easier for our employees. In the last couple of years, we have facilitated a number of conversations on the addition of the Juneteenth holiday as a paid holiday and contributed to that being realized. As I said, we have extended our well-being program beyond people enrolled in our health plan to all full-time and part-time employees. And last year, with the end of the legislative session, there was a new requirement for safe and sick leave, which we implemented through a speedy project that had a lot of work associated with it and extended it even to employees within the university that work outside the state of Minnesota. These examples reflect our part that we play in making our university community and our state better through our work in HR. I do want to recognize that this year has been marked with significant proposals and requests coming out of our shared governance partners in the form of the workforce resolution for reinvestment and from our union representatives. And the points that they make are valid. Our perspectives may be different in how we move forward, but it does signal a real opportunity for us. This is especially true if we realize that often what we are having a conversation on are our care and concern for common areas of importance, including competitive pay, comprehensive benefits, meaningful work, and the flexibility to balance our lives with our work. There are differences of opinion, but the university's collective strength comes from listening authentically to one another, respecting each other's viewpoints, trying to find common ground to move forward. The challenge lies in our ability to deliver on all the things we would like to do for our workforce, especially in light of limited staff and fiscal resources. We do have a great deal of work ahead of us. The three strategies we have chosen for discussion today are not an end-all, but they are very representative of important work we need to do now to develop mechanisms and engines to address some of the challenges we face as a very decentralized organization. This morning, in listening to the Audit and Compliance Committee, I was struck by the discussion around risk of acknowledging the benefit of being decentralized and the value and innovation that comes from that, but also the risk. And so some of these initiatives actually, I think, support addressing that topic. So as we look to the discussion points we have brought forward, the first one, and we may talk about this a little bit tomorrow as we talk about the workforce reinvestment topic, is to establish a presidential advisory committee on compensation. This would allow us to effectively recruit and retain employees. We would see the president as charging a new committee to establish an annual and long-term system-wide plan for investing in employee compensation and benefits. The committee would collaborate with shared governance, and its formation would comply with the faculty compensation policy. First, a master list of compensation issues, for instance, would be identified and prioritized. The items selected for a given year would be consulted extensively within the annual budgeting framework. And second, we would look at funding for benefit priorities as informed by an analysis that we would term a total rewards optimization. And this is a process that many employers go through to understand the value of the benefits they offer. As part of the TRO, a conjoint survey would be sent to all faculty and staff, providing comparisons of multiple benefit offerings that we currently have, and asking them to indicate their preference for the benefit, how they use it, if they value it over another benefit that they may be reviewing as well on the survey. This, coupled with the cost of each benefit, would create a clear picture, potentially, of what benefits are most valued by employees, and if we are offering something or not offering something that would be of value and would give us a multi-year strategy for proposed changes that we could potentially support financially. The second is to develop an internal talent marketplace. that supports the strategic alignment of talent management best practices. And we are starting this as a pilot with our Office of Information Technology and the Office of Human Resources. We are creating an integrated approach to promoting internal mobility and adaptability. A competency and skills architecture to enhance employee selection. So what expertise, what experience, what education is necessary to do a particular job? Performance management, how capable is someone at the job they're doing? What do they need to be supported in to do better or to move into another area of opportunity? And development. We would use an integrated employee engagement strategy that leverages survey data to inform the workforce development, and we would have leadership assessments that enhance the selection of central and local leaders and better inform and support onboarding success. In a nutshell, this would allow people in their local position not to necessarily have to leave that position to experience a growth opportunity or a new opportunity on a special project. And it would be an internal marketplace where we could identify that talent and match it with the project. So that's the vision, and we are currently in that pilot process with IT. The third is to expand our intercultural competence to support the development and intercultural competencies of our workforce. We have expanded this effort to facilitate an inventory of intercultural capacity called the IDI, or Intercultural Development Inventory. And we are starting with leadership to understand what their capacity is, where their opportunities are to expand their awareness. And we're not leaving it at the assessment stage. We are looking at an engagement of 18 to 24 months to develop a program that includes coaching, conversations, and implementation into the action plan or the work plan for the unit. Some of the groups involved in that right now that have partnered with us are facilities management, university relations, the Office of Human Resources, and I know Angel and her team have a couple more they're working with and some on dock. So it's becoming noticed and becoming asked for, which is a sign of a growing program that has value. We're excited about these opportunities and strategies. We certainly are engaged in other things that you may have heard about or have questions on, and at this time, we would love to have a conversation with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, let's turn to discussion. Does anybody have any ideas on any of these strategies or thoughts? Regent Kenyanya?
Mr. Chair, I have ideas. I don't know if they're good, but I'll give it a shot.
What idea is that?
VP Horseman and team, thank you for the presentation and for being the very first ones to try the pilot. I did watch the video. Maybe we can try music video form next time. I mean, for engagement. I'm throwing stuff.
We have that option.
Okay.
Shorter.
I said I didn't know if they were good, but I'll throw them out there. I was really excited to hear about the talent marketplace. And, you know, my day job, I work in consulting, so it's ironic that I really don't love when we seek out consultants at the university, not because they're not any good. Some of us are pretty good, actually. But because I believe all the talent is somewhere in this institution. I'm not always sure where, but, you know, and there's a lot of times where it makes sense to go externally, but often we're talking about a project, okay, we're bringing in, and I'm like, there's got to be faculty that are experts in this, right? But I don't know that we've had the mechanism to allow for that, and it still probably won't be so simple. You know, I do think some of the initiatives that you are heading are probably positioning us better to be able to implement something like that. But, you know, I mean, I can just imagine where there's a given initiative and that talent is in another college, another unit, and gee, could we get that person for the next few months at maybe at, you know, 30% FTE or whatever that requires, and if we had a system to facilitate that. And you talked about the benefits. they get to do a different job, a different project without having to go to a different job because we don't want them to go anywhere else. So we got to offer that differentiation. I'm really, really excited to see how that might take shape.
Thank you. Any comments?
I might turn to Senior Director Sullivan, who's helping lead that effort. So let's see if he has any additional thoughts.
Oh, yes, Chair Hipsch, Regent Kenyanya. Yeah, I mean, you put it probably better than I could in terms of what the vision is for that work and the need for it. We hear from our employee engagement survey as well as a lot of other mechanisms for getting input and feedback from faculty and staff that there's a desire for more support for development, more support for learning new skills, understanding where opportunities are. But of course, we don't have a mechanism right now. So if it's for looking across the university at opportunities that exist beyond where you are today. And that is exactly the challenge. So that ends up, I think, creating a lot of missed opportunity for development, for retention, to help people advance their careers, and also to make sure that we're making use of the skills we currently have. Because to your point, there's probably very few jobs that don't exist somewhere at the university, and we have tremendous depth of skills, but we don't always know where they are, and they don't know where the opportunities are. So that's exactly kind of the vision for that. It really should empower employees as well as help our workforce.
And Mr. Chair, just a comment. As you're speaking, I'm also realizing there's probably an interlock there with the academic mission, because I think some of those projects could also provide an opportunity for some scholarly work or research or publication thereafter, depending on who's all involved. But really excited to hear about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Regent Verheulen.
Thanks so much. And I too want to echo Regent Kenyanya's comments. Thank you, Vice President Hortzman, for being our first person to pre-record a presentation. I know that meant your staff and everyone who provided input had to move everything up so that we could get that into our docket material. So thank you. And looking through these strategies, kind of the thread that is here and was talked about as well is just really getting feedback from university employees to find out what they themselves are most invested in as far as their benefits and total rewards packages go. I think getting that kind of feedback is critically important. It's one thing to sit and look at all the options and think about who's participating in what, but instead to gather that information. I really like the idea of an advisory committee where there's more of that collaborative building. So not only just the survey work, but also the collaborative discussion about the results that are being received and trying to prioritize those and being able to rank them. I guess the one question I have is, has this group thought about, if you put out a survey and don't get anything meaningful, what's the next step?
Well, I will respond, Chair Hipsch, Regent Verheulen. That's a good question. We have been talking to, we have an external benefits consultant that we've worked with for many, many years who helps us with our actuarial work on our health plan. And with any decision making, we need to look at market data on. And so we have some background on how this project might work. I think when we talk about the advisory committee, what we're really doing is bringing senior leadership to engage and sort of be the backstop connected to the budget sixth on how we establish a joint compensation strategy that supports the work groups engaged in it. And so there will be, in theory, the way the TRO would work is the whole value of it is getting feedback from employees. I know our team has already consulted the FCC on this over the past year and a half, I believe, and had conversations about how this might be manifested and taken forward. And we're still in the planning stages, but we invest a lot of dollars in our benefits. there is enough there to probably realize some of the questions and asks we're getting right now if we just repurpose some of it. And there's a way to do that in theory without having some sort of draconian action on a health plan or whatever. I think there's a balance there. I'll just turn it over to Mary if she has any additional thoughts.
I would just add, you asked what if we didn't get much in terms of response. And when we've talked to this group, this external group that could do this work for us, they said you can survey employees on many different topics and get a lower response rate. You start talking to them about the mix of benefits or compensation offered, their history is they get 80% plus response rate. People respond. They want to get their voice in there. They told us, you want to be very careful what you put up for choice. You want to only put things out there that the university is willing to follow through with. Right. And so part of the process would be really working with shared governance. I just see it such a natural flow from the workforce reinvestment discussions. We'd work with them to say, you could put about 8 items on this survey. You can't do 30. It's got to be something that people are able to complete the survey in a reasonable amount of time. So maybe there's 8 to 12 items that would go up for like kind of weighting. We would want to have the items that our shared governance group agrees are the items that are of interest. So we would work on that together, put these things up, and then have people rate their value. And it's quite interesting, with this conjoint, you put the 2 items up and you have a slider scale, and you can just slightly move it to the right for an item that you might slightly prefer over something else. Or you can move it all the way to the right if it's much more preferred than another item. You take that, and then you also, we would provide the consultant with what it would cost to provide the benefit. And they can show us as an institution what our most efficient move is. If you were to move this item, you're going to get much more value. People are going to find that much more valuable. It may not even be the most high cost item, or it might be. It might be. But that's where you get to be able to see where the most efficient move is for the greatest value. And we just feel that could be something that would help us create a really strong plan, because we do recognize that people want us to turn these things over and revisit them, and we want to do that too. So,
and generationally, we probably have 6 generations in our workforce now. And obviously the younger ones are growing. That's where we have our higher turnover, is our people in their first 1 to 3 years of employment, which probably is not a surprise. Ours is higher than other areas. And when I was at a committee meeting earlier this week in the Senate, there was a comment that younger employees only care about pay. Well, pay is important, but if you look at surveys from that younger group nationally, healthcare and student loans are primary. And those are things that are in the benefits area, obviously, but they may look at what their needs are as a little different than those of us that have been in the workforce a long time. So I think that kind of information is really important to understand.
Thank you. Did that answer your questions, Regent Verhalen?
Chair Hipsch.
What?
Yes, it did. Thank you.
Got cut off.
Yeah, okay, we're good. Regent Talurabe.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch, and thank you for the presentation. I just have a couple of comments. One is I appreciate the prioritization and the strategies for us to talk about. I think they're the right areas. I'm also excited for the 3rd strategy, which I think is really a thread to the first 2 strategies, if we do it well. So just a couple of comments. One is I think maybe just changing kind of the word on cultural differences to actually cultural richness. I'm into being more asset-based. I think part of the challenges that we have here at the university is going to be solved through our innovation and our ability to create more diverse tables. And I don't just mean that in terms of, culture. And I mean, we're talking about lots of different things. And so I think what's great about having this third strategy is really leaning towards kind of moving from just the consciousness building and creating that kind of space to really leaning on, having a bias towards doing something that is actionable, right, for problem solving, for whether it's this university or community or the world. So I think that's really exciting. And so I might encourage adding the word innovation into that third strategy, just so that we are maintaining that push forward and that kind of future momentum. So just a comment.
Thank you. Is there anybody else that has anything? If not, I thank you all for coming, and hopefully you got some feedback that you wanted. So,
Thank you for your time.
okay. Next, we turn our attention to Vice President Roberts Davis and Assistant Vice President Leslie Kluger, who will update us on the strategic property planning work group's efforts and real estate strategy. It says 30 minutes, but we're going to have to do it in like 15.
Do our best.
Okay, sounds good. Okay, you can begin whenever.
Thank you, Chair Hipschen, members again. We are here today to talk about the annual update on the Strategic Property Planning Work Group and our efforts to direct the university's long-range real estate strategy. The Impact 2025 System-Wide Strategic Plan directs the establishment of a land retention, acquisition, and use strategy to optimize the university's property resources and drive strategic growth in a fiscally responsible manner. Since the adoption of Impact 2025, the administration has been making progress toward that goal. Taking a strategic approach to our real estate is essential. With over 28,000 acres of land across the state, the university's real estate strategy and assets must be stewarded in a manner that supports the university's teaching, research, and outreach mission. In addition to our land holdings, University Services also manages an extensive lease portfolio to support our mission, with over 300 leases where the U is the landlord and more than 200 leases where the U is the tenant. In order to better optimize these assets, the board adopted a resolution in September of 2022, directing the president to establish a strategic property planning work group. The work group was instructed to use the principles in the newly revised real estate and facilities policy to guide our work in determining potential properties for either acquisition or disposition. The work group meets monthly to provide strategic direction for acquisitions, dispositions, and leasing. The recommendations are then brought to the board for review and action pursuant to the board's reservations and delegations of authority. As a reminder, these are the principles that guide our real estate acquisitions and dispositions, and I do have more information on that, but in the interest of time, you can ask questions if you have any. Of course, our campus plans are a major driver of our real estate strategy. We completed the plans for the Twin Cities and Duluth campuses, and the board will review the Rochester campus plan at our June meeting. We launched the Crookston campus plan in March, and the Morris planning effort will start soon. I will now turn it over to Assistant Vice President Leslie Krieger to provide you with an overview of the recent accomplishments and a preview of potential upcoming transactions that the work group is tracking. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair Hipsch and members of the committee. The future of advanced agricultural research in Minnesota, or FARM, is an ongoing effort with which the board is very familiar, having approved multiple transactions over the past year. The board will be pleased to hear that, pursuant to its agreements with local landowners, the university has successfully acquired a total of 15 parcels with a combined acreage of over 1,200 acres, as shown in gold in this map. There remains one more parcel that's under a purchase option agreement that we anticipate to close before the end of the fiscal year, which then brings our total acreage for the project up to 1,369 acres. An assembly of this magnitude has required significant effort on the part of a team of people across the university, including PSRE, OGC, Finance, Health and Safety, and CFANS. We were also finally able to conclude an almost 20-year land assembly process at the beginning of January with the acquisition of the final parcel on Block 11. The acquisition of this block was highlighted in the 2009 campus plan with the goal of land banking for the university's future clinical campus expansion. While the plans for the university's future health discovery hub highlighted in the governor's Blue Ribbon Task Force are now on hold, we will be ready to advance our future clinical campus expansion when funding becomes available. The next recent acquisition was the result of a generous life estate gift. In this case, the property was donated to the foundation, and CFANS expressed a desire for the property for mission-related purposes to support its forestry research program. This property is located near the Cloquet Forestry Center, but outside of the Fond du Lac Reservation. This example is also the result of another generous gift from a donor. In this case, the property was gifted to the university, but when UMD determined that it did not have a mission-related purpose for the property, the real estate office proceeded with the sale. The administration informed the board of its intent to dispose of this property earlier this year, but because it did not meet the Regents' reservations and delegations of authority thresholds, the Regents did not have to review this final transaction. UMD will be using a portion of the sale proceeds for scholarships for students in the Swenson College of Science and Engineering, in keeping with the endowment that was established by the same donor in that college. The Strategic Property Work Group and the Umore Park Management Committee both spent considerable time and effort on this next item, as did staff from PSRE, OGC, Health and Safety, Finance, and CFANS, as well as our partners at the City of Rosemount, Dakota County, DEED, Greater MSP, and Excel over a 2.5-year period. The sale of this 280 acres was the result of a 2015 Board of Regents resolution directing the administration to take a more market-based approach to land sales at Umore Park. This means that once we have sold the property at a market rate, it is up to the new owner to determine how they develop the property in compliance with the City of Rosemount's permitting and zoning code requirements. As you will recall, following the approval of this sale, the boards passed a resolution allowing the use of the proceeds to be directed toward the design and acquisition costs associated with farm. As we had the opportunity to note at the Meta groundbreaking in March, this is a double win for the state of Minnesota, allowing for the advancements of local economic development, which is principle number 4 in your policy, but also advancing the university's agricultural teaching, research, and outreach mission, which are principles 1 and 3. And our final accomplishment that I'd like to highlight is a relatively small easement exchange with the Minneapolis Parks and Recreation Board. And at first glance, one might not recognize the strategic value of this transaction, but this easement exchange allowed the university to build the chemistry teaching addition at Fraser Hall in support of our teaching mission, and as specified in the Twin Cities campus plan. Also, by exchanging easements of equal area, both parties were able to acquire property rights at minimal out-of-pocket costs while advancing the greater community benefit. This easement area the park board received from the U will support their long-term effort to complete the Grand Rounds trail system, which extends throughout Minneapolis. I would now like to turn your attention to strategic real estate matters, which you may be hearing about more within the coming months in the upcoming year. These are at various stages of exploration and implementation and are not intended to be an exclusive list of transactions that the board may see them may have before them in the near future, but are rather intended to highlight some of the upcoming opportunities that we have. As you will note, farm shows up in both the accomplishments and potential list of upcoming transactions, given the fact that we are at the 1,300 acres of what was originally intended to be a 1,600-acre land assembly. With this footprint established in Moore County, the farm project has begun its pre-design phase. And as part of the pre-design, the team will be determining the optimal siting of the dairy, beef, swine, and poultry facilities. We will then determine if there are additional strategic properties that will need to be acquired in order to support the program. And by holding off on the final 200 to 300 acres, we allow ourselves the flexibility we need to optimize the design. Umore Park continues to be an active area for potential development, and in this example, we are focused on potential disposition to provide a benefit and enhancement to the local area. We are in conversations with the Rosemount Apple Valley School District for a potential siting of a new middle school. As the board is aware, the university has been actively engaged with the Fond du Lac Band of Lake Superior, Chippewa to advance our efforts to repatriate the Cloquet Forestry Center lands to the band. These 3,400 acres are the only property within the university's portfolio that are located within an Indian reservation. In addition to the potential land transfer, we continue to have productive conversations with the band about the future of the property to allow university research, education, and outreach to continue on the land in some form in close collaboration with the band. And this was reinforced by band leadership during the March 2024 legislative hearings. Our ability to transfer the property is contingent upon legislative action, which would transfer title of approximately 400 acres from the state to the university, and to settle outstanding previously issued bonds associated with facilities on the property. Language regarding the land transfer and the future funding for the bond defeasance are included in the current bonding bill, but we will not know the outcome until the legislature finishes its work on May 20th. As you are aware, the east side of Minneapolis campus has been extremely active. We continue to work closely with the University of Minnesota Foundation to implement the land exchange agreement that supports both the mix as well as our future clinical campus expansion. In the coming year, we anticipate we will be bringing to the Regents proposed leases for university occupants in Building 1 of the mix. We are just beginning to identify potential tenants, their financial capacity, and their programmatic needs. As Vice President Roberts-Davis noted at the beginning of the presentation, the Strategic Property Work Group directs our high-level leasing strategy. In general, over the past several years, we have worked to reduce our leased footprint where possible and apply much stricter standards for leasing space outside of the university's portfolio. That being said, there are instances where it makes sense to pursue a leased opportunity. In this case, identifying university tenants for the mix that advance the innovation ecosystem will enhance marketability of the development to private sector companies that wish to co-locate with university entities, and thereby creating a win-win for both the university and our private partners. Another potential development on the east edge of campus involves a potential market rate ground lease with UMAA for alumni housing. The Alumni Association has had their housing committee review the marketability and site options for an alumni housing development. We are in the very early stages of exploring the siting of such housing on the Minnesota lot near the stadium, but wanted to highlight this as a potential transaction for the board as it supports our four guiding principles. In addition to working with the foundation and the Alumni Association individually on the preceding two initiatives, we also will be working with them jointly over the coming year as the two owners of the University Gateway Corporation. It's hard to imagine that the ground lease and the office lease for McNamara are approaching our 25-year mark. Both the ground lease and the office lease include specific provisions relating to resetting the rent based upon market conditions. And so we will have the opportunity to work with Gateway Corporation to take a comprehensive look at these rents associated with these two leases. And finally, we would be remiss not to mention the university's ongoing discussions with Fairview as it relates to the university's strategic property planning. We recognize that the acquisition of the hospitals and CSC are well beyond any traditional real estate transaction and are being considered as a business transaction rather than a real estate deal. That being said, we would also like to highlight for the board the complex real estate relationship between the university and Fairview. The university currently rents over 85,000 square feet from Fairview, and Fairview rents over 240,000 square feet from the U. And as a result, as the administration continues conversations with Fairview on the hospitals and CSC, the board may also see additional real estate transactions and leases associated with this effort. We don't have any proposals for the board at this point in time, but rather would just like to highlight for you the possibility of these as it relates to our extensive property holdings near the hospitals. And with that, we conclude our presentation and stand for questions. Thank you, Chair Hipsch.
Thank you for a great presentation. You guys have a lot going on. Wow. Yeah. So is there any discussion? Questions? I just want to comment on the farm project, that how you put that together is really amazing. Kudos. I mean, to get that much land that close together, it's pretty amazing. So thank you for that. That really pushed that project along. So does anybody else have any questions or concerns? If not, I'm sorry I called you Kruger before. It's Krieger. We have Krugers in Perm, so it's spelled the same way.
Kruger's here too.
It'd be a lot easier for me if you would just change your name. So, but we're not going to go there. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Looking for a motion, Mr. Chair?
Do we have that kind of power? I don't think so. No, thank you very much, all of you. So, okay, we're going to move to the next item.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Okay, our final agenda topic is the informational items. Senior Vice President Tonneson, anything to highlight?
Thank you, Chair Hipsch. There's really just a few things. We have 3 HR-related Board of Regents policies that did go through the comprehensive review, and there were no changes in those, so just to highlight that. A couple of reports, the Debt Management and Investment Advisory Committee meeting reports from the most recent meetings. And lastly, there is a summary of the results of our recent beneficial and successful debt refinancing actions that were done in February and March. So if anyone has questions on anything related to those, you can let us know and we'll be happy to get back to you.
Are there any questions at this time? Otherwise, you can contact her later. So, well, that's what's that? Oh, go ahead.
Thank you. Not a question, Mr. Chair. Just want to highlight the 2.5 million in safety investments. Unless I'm reading that incorrectly, I know that's a topic that's been of high importance to the board.
Right.
And just wanted to highlight that.
Mr. Chair and Regent Kenyanya, the general contingency, that is not new information for this time. We went through that previously. That's funds set aside to implement a number of safety items that have come up this year.
Okay.
So that the general contingency is for things that come up during the year that are outside of the budget. That's what its purpose is. And so that was the purpose that was previously reported as a plan to fund those things out of the general contingency.
And this is just an update on
Yeah.
the expenditures and
Yes, and we provide that update to the general contingency every month.
Right.
And just do things that require approval, go in the consent report. If there's nothing that requires approval, it goes in information items.
Thank you. Just wanted to highlight that particular one because I, it's of importance to all of us right now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chair.
There being no additional business, we are adjourned.